How's it going, everyone? Thanks for being here. I don't have anything planned tonight. I've been busy, but I figured why not come on here with my fantastic friends, at least till my wife wakes up. She's taking a nap right now. So, yeah, thanks for being here, everyone. We'll just go through some stories of the day and just chat up some people. So, I'm trying to get affiliate status on Twitch, and I need to be doing so many hours and have so many people watching. So, tonight I'll be pushing my Twitch channel. Thank you so much for increasing my participation on my D Live channel. I really appreciate that. I need to get to 1,000 subscribers on D Live. Oh my goodness. Sorry about that. I need to get to 1,000 on D Live to get to the next level, and I need to get so many on Twitch. So you can follow me at Twitch TV at Normal America with Rob Noor or Normal America on D Live. So check those out if you would. That would be fantastic for me. So thank you, everyone that's watching on YouTube right now. I'd prefer you watch on one of those platforms, and the only reason is if I could avoid giving YouTube revenue, I would really appreciate it. So they're both free platforms. What's up, Medieval Mike? Thanks for being here, man. So yeah, just chatting tonight. What'd y'all think of the DNC stuff so far? Yeah, thank you, Faulty. Let me know if it's lagging there on D Live. Sometimes it gives me problems. One second, let me respond something. What do you call this thing? It's nope. Didn't mean to do that. There we go. Sorry about that. Hey, Rob, which platform would you like me to watch this, D Live or Twitch? I guess I'd prefer D Live. Would be just let me know if it's lagging there. A couple people have said it's lagged in the past. Inevitably, I would imagine I'll be transitioning full time to D Live and Twitch because YouTube likes to shadow ban me and demonetize me and send me warnings for using. At one point, I had a video removed on YouTube for a copyright infringement, and the infringement was this. Here, let me play this for you. I'm going to disappear for a second. That song you hear there, I got directly from the YouTube Studios free library of music that's copyright free. And they knocked one of my videos for using. So I sent an email to them and I never got anything back. So I've just kind of had it with YouTube. Yeah, Medieval Mike on Twitch. Nothing made you laugh more than AOC endorsing Bernie Sanders. Yeah, right. Good stuff. I don't know. Just the whole thing. It's just craziness. Like I said my piece on this the other day, but to defend far be it from me, but to defend the DNC for a moment. What's up, Rational? How's it going, man? To defend the DNC for a moment, I think it's tough without a live audience. Everything's transitioning to trying to figure out how to do it better. So that was a lot of the awkwardness of just this being the first time that they're trying to do everything virtually. But yeah, they suck. They're terrible. Yeah, if you watched the opening segment of Tucker last night, they showed a bunch of what you didn't see that was occurring during the DNC during the day. And it's just people saying, we're going to eliminate all the police. We're going to remove capitalism. White people are evil. Yada, yada, yada. That old chestnut. So the DNC is as radical as we think they are. They're trying to, give a nod and a wink to the radicals. Don't worry, we'll be radical. While then putting a face in front of America like, oh, we're very rational people. We're very normal people. They're not. Yeah, my buddy Rational Wrongthink on YouTube there saying not a lot happening here. It's pretty quiet in Australia apart from the rapidly growing police state. Yeah. In Australia, they're now sending out drones to take pictures and video of people that are not following social distancing guidelines. I saw. It's just interesting to see that we've lived in a time in a 3-month period. We've basically gone from, it was not good. Obviously, our governments were already infringing on our rights a lot, but we're in straight Orwell territory now. And as Orwell predicted, and as many other people predicted, this came from people not fighting back against this sort of fascism, but actually endorsing the fascism and claiming to be the moral superior people for doing it. So we see this on the left. They're better than you. They care about people. You don't care about black people. You don't care about poor people. You don't care about women. You don't care about the LGBT. You don't care about victims, blah, blah, blah. If you care about any of those groups, then you have to support our total authoritarianism and demonizing people based on their race and taking away your First and Second Amendment rights. Or if you're in Australia, you don't have those amendments, but your right to free speech and your right to protect yourself and other things like that. Rational says, smashing your car windows to extract you if you refuse to tell the police everything they want to know about your movements. Yeah, that's Australia today. That's how serious they're taking contact tracing. Police can come up, ask you exactly who you associated with, exactly where you've been. If you refuse to cooperate, they'll smash out your window, drag you out in cuffs. That's Australia. Isn't it ironic that the same people that claim, oh, the police are so racist, they're a terrible institution, also want the police to have the power to arrest you for not wearing a mask? Good. Thanks, Sneed. So apparently, yeah, things are looking good in D Live. So if you're on YouTube and would appreciate following me on Twitch or D Live, I'd really appreciate that, because YouTube's terrible. Or you can stay on YouTube too, that's fine. But yeah, so I talked a little about the debate here in my show yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday that I had. So you can check that video out on my YouTube. It's 3.5 hours though, and it's a lot of people yelling over each other. There was a guy, Enderdax, on there. He was on the conservative side though. He's iffy as far as a conservative, seems like a reasonable guy. And then there was a guy, Lecture Fan, definitely a conservative, definitely a Trump supporter. He's a little more brash than me, and I think that there's some things I would disagree with him about, but I thought it was funny that they just want to attack him the entire time because he has the temerity to stand up for Trump and his principles. They try that with me, except they know that they're not going to be able to pigeonhole me into some extreme position, and I'm informed and eloquent enough to make them look ridiculous. And it's not anyone's fault. I'm not saying I'm better than anyone. The reason I'm good at that, the reason I'm good at it is because I'm practiced at it for 9 years of being told that I'm a racist in the debate community. Not even knowing my position, just for my skin color. Clearly I'm white, I'm privileged, I'm racist, whiteness is evil. I heard that at least every other tournament. But in addition to that, being a conservative, well, then clearly you're racist. So I learned how to argue back against those positions. So I thought that he did just fine. Let's see what's going on. What's up, Wild Saffron? Thanks for being here. Freebird223, Faulty, thanks so much. Dark Sage, go ahead. Dark Sage says he or she has an interesting political comment they want to make. Feel free, and hopefully I get to it. So one of the things I wanted to do is read an exchange that I had on Facebook. Now, what I won't do is put anyone's name or actually put the page up because I don't want to give anyone's name out. Now, for those of you who didn't see this, I put this on my social media. I put it on Facebook and Twitter. And let me see if I could put this part up, just this part. And what this is so I did a video, if you saw, that was on YouTube and Facebook, Twitch, or not Twitch, Twitter. And what it was a video that showed Oprah's statement with Cannon. In fact, maybe I'll just play it. How about that? You guys mind? You don't mind. Let's see what I can do. Just give me 1 second here. Hopefully I can get this working. Look at that. Now, this is the first video I did. I just got to change a couple audio settings for you here. This is the first video I've ever done where I actually did not say a word. This was me just letting it speak for itself. And the first section is going to be from Oprah's little gathering to shame white people or whatever she does. One of the most privileged people in the history of the world talking to you about how you're privileged. And then I juxtapose that to the news footage of Cannon Hinton's death. So let's hope this plays.
I was going to say, and then I'll let you answer it. White people, there are white people who are not as powerful as the system of white people, the caste system that's been put in place, but they still no matter where they are on the rung or the ladder of success, they still have their whiteness.
5-year-old Cannon Hinton loved to ride his bike and loved animals. His mother tells us he was always smiling and loved his family. Now the family is preparing for his funeral after they say he was shot in the head while playing outside at his father's home on Archer Road in Wilson at around 5:30 Sunday night. Police say 25-year-old Darius Sessoms, a neighbor, shot the child, and it was not an accident. The reason is still unclear. Police believe the suspect took off in this black Toyota Corolla without a front bumper. Cannon's family was too distraught to talk on camera. They just hope the killer is brought to justice.
Okay. So that was the video I did. Now, the purpose of that video was not to compare Cannon Hinton's death to George Floyd's death. The purpose of that video was to show how toxic the ideology of white privilege is. And so it was to infer a question. Where was Cannon Hinton's white privilege? That's what my question was. I put that video up, and that was one on Facebook is where I started to get a lot of heat, where people that were my friends and family or people from the debate community decided to have this discussion with me about white privilege. Some more rude than others, but that's fine, whatever. I don't mind people questioning me. Dark Sage, by the way, if you stick with me here, I will respond to what you're saying. Just to read, Dark Sage had a point he wanted to make, and I think it's a worthwhile point, and it goes to what I'm speaking. So here's what he says on Twitch. He says, I want to say it's not all police officers are racist. It's more like the police unions as a whole are very corrupt, and there is widespread systemic racism with the various police unions. Take, for example, the LAPD. Are all LAPD cops bad? No. But is the LAPD corrupt? Union corrupt? Absolutely. And we need to do a better job at addressing the systemic racist that happens because of our police unions, rather than say all officers are bad. Let me give an example, if I may. Yet to give the example. The problem is, I'll be interested to see if you can prove that the LAPD is systemically racist. You might be able to prove there is corruption that runs through the LAPD, but the idea of proving that it's systemic racism will be difficult. And I've yet to see anyone be able to prove that. I've yet to see anyone give any evidence that George Floyd was killed for his skin color. The only thing that I hear is, well, if he was white, he wouldn't have been killed like that. That's not true. Tony Temple was white. He was killed in much the same way. The police officers faced less justice than in the case of George Floyd. So try again. You have to come up with a better reason than if he was white, this wouldn't have happened. That's clearly not the case. We could point to examples. Daniel Shaver's another example. Police officers killed him in cold blood. Nothing was done about them. So this is giving a case to there are corrupt police officers, and sometimes the system will be corrupt and allow them to get away with it. I don't see where racism factors in. Now, we could get to the numbers here later if you like that discuss, well, what is the data? 2.5 times more blacks are more likely to be involved in a violent interaction with police or shot by police than whites. Yeah, well, that's because they commit about 2.5 times more violent crime, which seems to be a better explanation. Well, we could get into this discussion as time goes on, but I am reading you, and I do appreciate people bringing a different perspective. So by all means, Dark Sage, go ahead and include what you want. So that was my intent. I was intending to point out the fact that why do we have this discussion of white privilege? Where's Cannon Hinton's white privilege? And why would I listen to someone like Oprah? Now, I don't mention George Floyd's name in that, nor did I mention him anywhere on Facebook, anywhere on any of my videos. Did I compare this death to the death of George Floyd? And I'll actually make the case for why George Floyd's death is more newsworthy than Cannon Hinton's. The reason is because he was killed by police officers. Regardless if you think the fentanyl actually killed him or whatever. When you have people tasked with enforcing the law, possibly breaking the law, that becomes more newsworthy. However, we can see that the media is hypocritical. For example, the FBI engaged in a coup against the President of the United States would thereby be one of the most newsworthy stories you could cover, and instead our media decided to cover it up instead of covering it. And that's the other point that was being brought up. It has nothing to do with George Floyd. It has to do with the media is pushing a racial narrative. The media is pushing a narrative to demonize white people, to demonize conservatives, to exploit the black community. They don't care. The media and these corporations and academia and Silicon Valley and the Democratic Party, they don't care at all about the black community. It's just potential money and votes. And everybody knows it. Every time I do one of these debate panels like Monday and I bring up, can you name me an institution that's not supporting Black Lives Matter? The very first thing that everyone says is, well, they're just doing that because it's profitable. Yes, exactly. That's why they're driving the wedge. They don't really care about the black community. And in fact, they're doing it because it's profitable and because by exploiting that narrative, it allows them to obtain power and it causes division. This is exactly my argument. I've made this argument over and over for years now. The last thing that the people in power in this country really want is for poor white people and poor Hispanic people and poor black people, and more than just poor, but working class and normal white people, normal black people, normal Hispanic people, normal average citizens, regardless of their sexuality, regardless of their religion. They don't want us all sitting around going, wait a minute, why has our elected leaders been screwing us over for 50 years? Why are they outsourcing all of our wealth to other countries like China? Why is it that I now have to work 70 hours for what I used to have to work 40 hours to obtain? Why do me and my wife both have to have a job and work our fingers to the bone? And yet, despite that, all we do is get lectured by these same people that are wealthy and elite about how we need to do more and about how we're bad people, regardless of your skin color. Why is that the case? Well, nothing will ever change as long as these corporations... I mean, it's just hilarious to me to listen to these people on the left. They acknowledge full-handedly, oh, yes, we know that all these corporations are just paying lip service. We know that that's what they're doing. Oh, but you think Joe Biden isn't? Why are you burning down poor black neighborhoods instead of burning down these corporations then? Now I'm against burning down anything. But if you really think the system is corrupt and the system is systemically racist, then why aren't you doing something to the people that control the system? Instead, you're going to what? Vote for the same Democrats that have been running that system, particularly in inner cities, for the past 60, 70 years? Dark Sage says, Chris Dorner. Remember his case? Nothing was done to investigate his claims of what happened to him. The LAPD basically brushed it off and said he was just angry and disgruntled. Yet from what I've read, he was discriminated against not just based on his skin color. There was a multitude of issues there, and the LAPD never bothered to do anything. They basically said he was just angry, and what happened to him did not occur. Does that prove racism? Anyone could say that. I mean, there's thousands upon thousands of cases a year where people say, I didn't get that promotion because of racism. Bubba Wallace says, I had a noose placed in my garage because of racism. Jussie Smollett says, I was attacked because of racism. Maybe he was individually treated bad. I don't know this story. I don't know Chris Dorner's story. I don't know his skin color. Presumably he would be a person of color and he's claiming discrimination. Okay. I could point to you 50 people I know that claim they were discriminated for being white. Does that prove systemic racism against white people? I don't know. First time here. What's the Stab Wound Bear says, first time here. What's the topic? Is it how truly awesome us whites are? No, it's kind of discrediting people that rally on about white privilege. I despise identitarian politics based on skin color, regardless if they're white, black, Asian, Hispanic. I don't care. I have no love for white supremacy whatsoever. I have no love for people. Like, it's fine if you want to focus on your race and take pride in your race. I have no interest in it. None. I think it only leads to bad places. And I think that decrying people based on their skin color as being privileged or having original sin or something like that leads to racism. And in fact, many times is directly racism itself. So that's the point. Oprah could lecture you on white privilege. And my point was, one, her and the media are pushing a racial narrative. And second, how dare the most privileged people in the world talk about privilege? I mean, it makes no sense. Why isn't Oprah, why would she have a show talking about white privilege when it's clear that her financial privilege is more important than skin color privilege will ever be? Why isn't she on there having show after show after show, having poor people come lecture her? It's easy to have a bunch of white people sit there with one black person saying, you white people have privilege, don't you understand? Oh, yes, yes. Why doesn't Oprah throw herself in that pile and have a bunch of poor people lecture her about how privileged she is? Well, she won't do that because it's hollow, because they don't really care. It's not about pointing out people that are disenfranchised, just like George Orwell said. George Orwell started to suspect, as he wrote The Road to Wigan Pier, that actually the socialists that claimed to speak for the poor, it wasn't that they liked the poor. It was that they hated anyone who had more than them. That's what Oprah's doing. That's what most of these people screaming about white privilege is. It's just a way to exploit the system to get more power for themselves. Even when you see white people on Facebook, your friends, or celebrity white people acknowledging their white privilege, what they're really doing is just trying to up their station in society. They think that they'll get some applause and some virtue signaling points that will make their standing in society better. If you're white and you really believe you have white privilege, and you really believe that you then, as a result of that, have had material success because of that whiteness, give up your material possessions. Simple enough. Don't lecture other people. If you personally feel that your wealth was obtained by your skin color and that that's unfair and oppressive, then give up that wealth. You can live off $40,000 a year, no problem. Come to my neck of the woods. Come get a job making minimum wage. Give your house, your cars, all of your possessions. If you have a scholarship, give that up. If you have a job that has some sort of, benefit to it, it's a decent job, give that up for a person of color. Put your money where your mouth is. Words are cheap. But you won't do that. I was talking to a black gentleman the other day. He said he was proud that so many white people were supporting Black Lives Matter. I said, are they doing anything? Are they going into the inner city and cleaning things up? Are they thousands upon thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of white people are in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. What are they doing? They going in the inner cities? They helping out? Some of them are going and rioting and burning the city down. You see a mass movement of wealth trickling from these millions of white people screaming Black Lives Matter to the inner cities? I don't see it. It's easy to say it. Who's more moral? The person that says, I think talking about privilege based on skin color, it's used to divide us, it's a terrible thing. That's my stance. Or the person that says, yes, I have white privilege. Of course I do. And you're immoral if you don't acknowledge your white privilege. Oh, but I'm going to keep all my stuff. What they're basically saying is, me and my ancestors stole everything I own from your ancestors, but I'm going to keep it. I stole your stuff, but I'm going to keep it. But at least I acknowledged I stole it. It's nonsense. Now, I'm with you, Stab Woundberry. He says more colorfully than me. He works his butt off just to make crappy pay. Hey, what's up, Alpha Drias? Yeah, I was talking about Lecture Fan here earlier. I was telling my audience, Lecture Fan was my fellow conservative on the debate the other night. I thought we handled ourselves quite well. Now, Lecture Fan, I approached those debates. Before I go on with this topic, since you're here, Alpha, and thank you so much for watching me on Twitch here. One of the things I'm trying to do when I go on someone like Prime K's or Dylan's show is this. I do think that it's important to talk to people from the other side. And that's because I believe that my politics, and I would assume I largely agree with Lecture Fan, are correct. They are the correct politics. We have the correct principles. We have the correct philosophy. Even if we would disagree on some things, I truly believe that. Being a conservative is good. My worldview is good. So I don't shy away. I'm not like the left. I don't need to censor people. I don't need to ridicule them. I don't need to scream at them. I don't need to cancel them. I could go on their platform, on their show, with 10 against 1 if they want, and I will win my argument. And I will not give them ammunition by yelling and screaming at them or anything like that. Now, each of us have different stylistic choices. So it wasn't one of the things I was trying to do because they had such anger at Lecture Fan was to show them look, I don't have to respond in kind, but he's right, and you can't deal with the argument. And that was the case most of the time. Now, again, it's not that I agreed with him on everything, but the debate was Monday, Alpha Drias. If you check Lecture Fan's channel, you can go to my channel on YouTube, Normal America with Rob Noor, and you can find the debate there. It was on Prime K's channel Monday. So, but yeah, that's what was going on with that debate. So anyways, that's the deal with white privilege. It's nonsense. Now, I will go through my exchange with someone. This person that the exchange I had with is from the debate community and is a good debater. Another thing that I truly believe in is using least necessary force. So here's the thing. I'm good at debate. I did it for years. I was one of the better debaters in the country. I was at least top tier. Not top tier like top 10, but I was probably in the top 100. I think that's fair. I made it to the national debate tournament, which is only like 30 or 40 schools. 72 teams, but only probably 30 or 40 schools. I qualified for it, so that's pretty good. If I'm debating someone at the bar, whether they be a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter or anywhere in between, and it's clear that they don't follow politics that much, I'm not just going to start blasting them unless they're super arrogant and, whatever. But everyone has something to add. And I'm not trying to make someone feel like crap. Just like if I go work on a car, I don't know what I'm doing. And I wouldn't really appreciate if someone's like, oh, what an idiot you are. So you're just like, okay. I try my best. But when you're dealing with someone in the debate community that I personally know, well, the gloves are off. I'm not punching down then. That's someone right in my level. And so I had several people in the debate community comment on my ideas on white privilege. So before I get to the specific what was said, and I will not show it because I'll show my initial post, but what I won't show is their names or anything like that. I don't want any of that sort of nonsense going. But I'm going to go through this, and it'll be lengthy, and I'm going to explain how even someone that's intelligent, if you listen to them, if you leave them explain, they're so interested in winning every argument, they'll tell you the truth of what they really think, and they don't even realize they're doing it. So you'll hear from this person who sounds quite reasonable at first, exactly what he thinks Black Lives Matter is and why he supports them. Spoiler alert, it has to do with you can't be racist towards whites. It has to be, yes, it has to do with, yes, I know they're violent, but I support that. It has to do with, yes, this is rejecting capitalism. No, he wouldn't tell me any of that up front, but once you get into the line by line of the debate, all of a sudden it comes out. So, well, yeah, Alpha, it's better to be able to research your position, but that debate Monday, it wasn't necessary. It was just stuff that I intuitively know. So let's get to my initial post. So I posted that video that you saw, and for those of you that were just coming in, it was just a video of Oprah talking about white privilege, and then the story of Cannon Hinton, the 5-year-old boy that was killed by a black man. So what I'm going to do is I'll put this up, and you could read along with me, but then I will close it as I read the responses. I say, seems many people wanted to accuse me and others of somehow being racist or ignoring black deaths by pointing out the case of the media ignoring Cannon Hinton, the 5-year-old boy who was executed in his yard. I can only speak for myself, but I would like to address this. I personally pointed out this case for 2 reasons. God, go away. The first was to point out the disgusting nature of some of the most privileged people in the world, like Oprah, claiming all white people, even those who have had bad things happen to them, have privilege. Let me check real quick. Just a minute. Yeah, we're good. Yeah, I'm streaming on other platforms simultaneously, so I'm currently on Periscope, DLive, YouTube, and Twitch. Perhaps before lecturing others on their privilege, she should look to herself. Her comments are not only a dog whistle for racism against whites, which we see used by almost every institution in this country that decries white privilege, fragility, white sin, etc., but also seem particularly callous when thinking about young Connor's white privilege. The second reason is what I feel more people are mentioning. I'm not saying Cannon Hinton's death detracts from George Floyd's death. Despite any flaws he may have had, George Floyd did not deserve to die and be treated the way he was by police, even if the cause of death is in question. Pointing to the death of this 5-year-old doesn't change that. Nor does this story meant to detract from the message of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is a Marxist terrorist organization that seeks to dismantle the USA, and the policies they demand, such as dismantling the nuclear family, along with violence so many of them commit or excuse, discredits the movement on its own, regardless of the tragic death of this child. The reason this story is important is that it was being ignored by the media. The same media that pushed the lie that Trump said Nazis were good people. The same media that covered up for the corruption in the intel community against Trump that started during the Obama administration. The same media that defended adult racist homophobes that screamed at children because the Covington kids were perceived as Trump supporters. The same media that said believe all women, accused Kavanaugh of being a gang rape facilitator, yet conveniently don't believe any women who accused Biden or Bill Clinton. The media doesn't want to help particular communities. They're merely a propaganda outlet for the elite that want to cause division in our country. That's why people are so outraged by the lack of media coverage over Cannon Hinton's story. Yes, I know the media is now covering it, after regular people use social media to shame them into doing so. Meanwhile, those saying the reason the media didn't cover it was because the murder was quickly arrested. The cop who killed Floyd was arrested after 4 days. Yet months later, we still have nonstop media coverage and protest, which violate social distance orders, which the media and their leftist allies tell us will lead to a horrific virus spreading. The same media that was so serious about covering how obviously racist this country is, the Jussie Smollett hoax, the Bubba Wallace hoax, anytime there's a supposed hate crime, almost all of which are hoaxes. The same media that couldn't wait to talk about a rise in anti-Semitic attacks in New York until it learned it wasn't Trump supporters, but rather radical people who seemed more in line with the black nationalist Nation of Islam. The same media that eagerly carried the funeral of George Floyd. which included praise for the racist black nationalist Nation of Islam that was running security for George Floyd's funeral. The same media that acted like the widespread riots across the country are not occurring. That's the relevance of discussing this murdered 5-year-old child. Some of us see how the media is pushing only stories that help them and their establishment allies achieve power through causing division. So before you accuse me or imply others are racist for discussing this story and the media bias, please consider maybe they genuinely care about the death of this boy and are outraged by the double standard in the coverage of it. That was my take, right? Not saying, oh, they covered George Floyd, so they have to cover it. I wasn't even interested in that. Again, George Floyd was a cop supposedly causing a murder or causing a death, which is more newsworthy. I will agree. But the reason this is newsworthy is the media is pushing the narrative of how racist this country is from racist whites towards blacks. When in reality, most crime is intra-racial, which means most of the time there's black crime, a black victim, it's a black perpetrator. Most of the time there's a white victim, it's a white perpetrator. But if you want to push the racial divisive narrative and talk about interracial crime, well, the most recent statistics are from the Bureau of Justice in 2018, and it shows that an individual black is 48 times more likely to commit a violent crime against a white than vice versa. And it's clear the media has no interest in covering those stories. But this isn't juxtaposed to George Floyd. It's juxtaposed to the Covington kids. If you go through that thread on Facebook, which I don't encourage you to because I don't want you to see people's names or anything. Real quick, Alpha Treya says the media is creating more racism through the means of saying you can't be racist towards whites or blame whites for everything. That's a cultural and communal problem. That's exactly right. They want to cause racism. And while they do that, yes, it's detrimental to whites. It's also detrimental to blacks. Get this hashtag going for me, right? Here's the statement that you should use. Black Lives Matter. That's why I'm against Black Lives Matter. The statement Black Lives Matter, absolutely agree. There are terrible problems in the black community that Americans, we should all try to come together to solve. That's why I'm against the organization Black Lives Matter, because their supposed solutions make things worse for black people and white people and Hispanic people and Asian people and all people. Marxism that they want, terrible for all communities. Defunding the police, who do you think's the initial group that'll face the brunt of that? Inner city black communities. That's where we see homicide spiking when we defund the police. Dismantling the nuclear family, that'll affect all Americans, especially the inner city black community, where single parenthood's already such a problem and leads to many of the problems we see in those communities. So I think Black Lives Matter. I truly do. I talk about problems in the black community all the time. I talk about my respect for the black community. I talk about how the party that I'm in, the Republicans, are terrible for ignoring a lot of the trouble that goes on in the black community. But that doesn't mean that I then have to endorse Black Lives Matter or the Democrat Party, which is a party that's interested in keeping black people impoverished and keeping black people dependent on them and the government. If we started treating everyone as equals despite their skin color, or we ignored skin color in our day-to-day actions and in our policies, within a generation or two, the black community would be thriving. The more you focus on race, the more you you want to just say everything's the fault of sins of the past, the less personal responsibility is allowed to be taken by people in the black community, the more they're just treated as children, and the less likely they are to be able to get the tools they need to achieve as much as everyone else. Oh, Freebird, it has nothing to do with an obligatory disclaimer, right? I understand what you're saying. I don't have to explain that I'm not racist. That's not what I'm doing, though. The black community, right? Let me say one other thing. I think dividing yourself based on community, on skin color is stupid. But I understand it because I get rage when people attack my community. My community's not white, though. That's not how I view my community that I associate with. I associate with working class Americans, regardless of your skin color. I think it's ridiculous that we don't have politicians that represent us, really. A handful. Trump tries to. There's a handful of others. But basically, even the Republicans we elect, they don't care about us. So I get there are legitimate problems in the black community. Legitimate. Does a lot of it have to do with personal responsibility? Yes. But a lot of it has to do with the democratic policies that have kept those communities in disarray for decades. So yes, we should be working to make that better. We as Republicans, or even not Republicans, just non-Democrats, should be telling the world, look, yes, these problems exist. And largely, we feel they're a result of Democratic policies. So I'm not just virtue signaling like, oh, I truly believe this. Crutcher says, because they're lazy, I'm tired of giving money to the blacks. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous statement. If you took a particular community that was white, right? Let's say you took Appalachia. And if you just said, well, we're going to get war on poverty in Appalachia, and we're going to go door to door and knock on poor white people's families and say, hey, if you get the fathers out of these houses, then all of a sudden we'll give you government money. And then if there was a big cultural campaign for 40 years to say, poor white people in Appalachia, nothing's their fault. The crime's not their fault. They should be given a bunch of stuff. Don't you think after 4 or 5 generations that there would be substantially more problems in those communities? The same's true of the black community. So no, I'm not going to denigrate people based on their race. I'm not. Now, is it true that many of the problems in inner city black communities are self-inflicted? Yes. But it's also true that Democrats set the conditions up to encourage that self-infliction. We could deal with both at the same time. And I agree with you, Alpha. The welfare system is a big problem of that. When you depend on the government for your subsistence, then you're beholden to that government entirely, and you never learn the importance of self-reliance. Check out the video at the top of my YouTube channel that explains my channel. Why is the United States the greatest country in the history of the world? Because it was the first country that codified into its foundational documents the importance of the individual and of personal freedom, but the other side of that coin is personal responsibility. And when you take that individuality out by encouraging a nonstop welfare state, bad things happen. So that's what I see occurring. Now, what I want to do is focus on one comment then, a thread of comments that was made by an associate of mine in the debate community. So I won't read his name, but I'll read it and I'll try to be slow. Do you all mind if I go grab a drink real quick? How about this? I'll put on a YouTube video that I did that might be relevant to this discussion. I'll put that video on, and then... that's not it. And then I'll go grab a drink real quick. Let's see. Videos? Just bear with me for a second. I get parched because I talk too much. 1 month ago. One second. I know what video I'm looking for. Short one. Police and many. All right. I want to warn you that this is incredibly graphic. My beard was longer then. Incredibly graphic video you're about to see. But I want you to look at the case of Tony Tempo here. So no cold one. I work tomorrow, so it's going to be sugar-free lemonade. That's what I'll be drinking. But let me make sure this runs for you real quick. Those police in Minneapolis did to George Floyd is despicable, and they deserve to go to jail for murder as far as I'm concerned. However, what's also despicable is how we see the Democrats and the media trying to paint this picture as racist and create racial division so that they could drum up power and support and be able to win elections. It is absolutely disgusting, and I could prove that they're doing this in a hypocritical way. Did you know that in 2016, police officers in Dallas did a very similar thing? A schizophrenic man called the police for help, and they pinned him on the ground with their knee in the back of their back and neck to the point where he suffocated and died and was ruled murder. None of those police ended up facing any sort of criminal charges. Do you remember the media and Dems calling for riots? Do you remember those riots occurring? Of course not. Now I'm going to show you some of this video as you can hear them laughing as they murder this white man, and you can make your own mind up. So I warn you, this is very disturbing. I love you. I like the door.
Tony.
Tony! Hey! Back to school. Wake up.
I don't want to go to school,
First day, you can't be late.
I'll link the video below so you can see, but they murdered that man and are sitting there joking. The media and the Democrats, the Al Sharptons, they didn't scream this was racism against white people. LeBron James wasn't saying shows that the country's racist against white people. It goes to show you how hypocritical they are, and they don't actually care about George Floyd being dead. They only care about using it as a token to get power. Yeah. Couldn't agree with you more, Rob, from 3 months ago. Absolutely. So that was the case of Tony Timpa. It's on video. You watch it all. It took, what did the video say? It took 2 years for those cops to face charges. Then they were exonerated from all charges. They hid the body cam footage for over 2 years. They, unlike with George Floyd, they actually laughed at him as he was screaming, "You're going to kill me." They made fun of him, made jokes. By all accounts, that's a very similar situation, if not worse. They were more heinous while it was occurring, mocking him. None of the cops were arrested. Where was the riots? That proves, right? That proves systemic white racism, right? Anti-white racism, correct? Isn't that what that proves? Isn't that what we're told? It couldn't happen to a white man. It wouldn't happen to a white man. That's what everyone told me about the case of George Floyd. If George Floyd was white, the cops would have been brought to justice. Really? So, okay, that's a little background. Let's go to the comments. So, here's the person commenting to me. This is what they said. "You're conflating a tragedy with an injustice. Cannon Hinton's death is terrible, terrible tragedy, but not an injustice. His killer was arrested and has already been charged with first-degree murder. Black death at the hands of cops, and only after immense pressure and scrutiny of every element of the situation, and only then is there even a minimal charge brought forth, is an act of injustice. Actually, looking at these two situations, it's very clear why the news covers one and not the other. Tragedies happen every day, multiple times each day. It's absolutely terrible, and I wish it would never happen. However, tragedy, when intertwined with gross injustice, is infuriating. Your comments above imply that Cannon's death was racially motivated. Decades of unchecked institutional racism has led to countless black deaths as an injustice of need of reporting, protesting systemic reforms." I say thanks for the response. Several things. First, perhaps you missed the part where I said I never mentioned George Floyd in any context, nor should this take away from his death. So how am I conflating the two? I did mention how horrible of an organization BLM is, which it is, as its policies and actions make lives worse for Americans it affects, especially in the black inner city communities. But that has nothing to do with Cannon Hinton, as I outlined. It seems that many people addressing my post are the ones who want to conflate this with George Floyd's death. Second, I noticed that neither you nor anyone else have disagreed with me with my take on how this is even remotely mentioned the litany of bias with the media I've outlined. I quite clearly outlined my post as two criticisms, pointing out the most privileged people like Oprah decrying white privilege for all white people is toxic, and criticizing the media for their race-baiting agenda. Only focusing on why the media should have covered the Floyd case, but not this, is unresponsive. Please explain to me how Cannon Hinton's tragedy was not newsworthy, but Nick Sandmann smirking after being attacked by an adult racist was worthy of being the biggest story in the country for over a week. Third, I'm slightly offended that you would speak to my implication. Show me once where I implied racism was the motivation for Cannon's death. I never have. I have heavily implied the races of the killer and the child were the motivation for the media not covering it. But while we're speaking of implying racism, can you or anyone in the country that has been supporting mass protest in the time of a pandemic they tell us is so serious many of us can't go to work, and downplaying the riots across the country? The evidence of racism in George Floyd's death? I've yet to see one piece of evidence race had anything to do with that death. Surely you'll provide it. I understand because the left, the media, Black Lives Matter, and other groups want to scream racism as a motive for every tragedy. They may want to assume that that's what everyone else has done. I am not doing that. Fourth, the entire country was outraged over the death of Floyd. It took 4 days for his killer to be arrested. By that point, there were already riots. A police precinct had been burnt down. One person had been killed during the riots, and so forth. If your argument is swift justice in the case of Cannon proves this isn't an injustice, why burn down parts of a city 2 days after an incident? Lastly, there needs to be a conversation about this unchecked institutional racism. From where? Police forces controlled by exclusively Democratic politicians? I know it's popular to just yell institutional racism, and certainly there are things to discuss, even if they are overblown or mislabeled in many instances. But watching Black Lives Matter help cover for corporations with sweatshops like Nike, or banks that have exploited people in the past like Chase Bank, and having them be supported by the same leaders that have been in charge of these alleged racist institutions for decades seems to be counterintuitive to achieving positive improvement in the inner cities. A revolution supported by every major institution in the country, supposedly against institutional racism. The focus on race allows the elites in the country who have done nothing for working class Americans of all races, creeds, religions, and so forth to continue to exploit those people so long as they chant Black Lives Matter. Show me the racists and I'll fight them with you. Strange that only works one way, though. How many times in the tolerant debate community, because we are both debaters, were we told to reject the evils of whiteness? Show me the racist policy and I'll fight it with you. Strange, though, when we have actual blatant racism like Yale's discrimination against whites and Asian, all the people who spend so much time decrying racism are silent. But implying with no evidence that George Floyd died as a result of racism, only to fan racial flames, which is exactly what the media is doing. Why did the death of Tony Timpa, who died in an eerily similar fashion, receive almost no attention? In that case, the officers were protected from arrest for years, and none were convicted. Timpa was white. Could the problem be some bad cops as opposed to racism? Lastly, I'll say it again. The death of George Floyd was horrific, was newsworthy, and should have been covered. Same is true of Cannon Hinton. I never once said that one case should be covered at the expense of the other. I'm merely pointing out the obvious bias of the media and how this fits into a pattern of them selectively pushing stories to fan racial tensions. I suppose Cannon Hinton smirked at his killer like the Covington kids, then CNN would have been all over it. So I think that I was spot on. Aren't I great? Wife, no. Now I got my wife in the peanut gallery going, ugh. All right, love you too, wife. I'll be in a while. So, and let's see what his response was to that. Now notice, him and everyone else that responded, did you notice that first post that I read to you gave all the examples of the media's bias? Covering for a coup against Trump, going after a white kid for smirking at adult racists yelling at him, pushing all of the hoax stories, even though there was no evidence to back them up. Like Jussie Smollett, it took 3 seconds to realize that story was garbage. They talked about it for days. No one touches that, right? Oh, no. It all just proves racism somehow. It's just racism. That's what we have to know. So let's see how he responds. I specifically asked, can you show me how this was racist? Thanks for the conversation, he says. A few issues with my response. First, I've been the only person to mention George Floyd in this thread. I referenced your conflation of tragedy with injustice, not Cannon Hinton's death with George Floyd's death. Juxtaposing the media coverage of these two events is the problem with everything you've said in this matter. Okay, pause here. He didn't use the word George Floyd, but if you go back up, he said, I'm conflating tragedy with injustice. Cannon Hinton's death's terrible. His killer was arrested. Black death at the hand of cops only after immense pressure. So he's bringing up cases like George Floyd. I never did that. So he says, oh, because he didn't use the word George Floyd, that's okay. That's how ridiculous these debates become. So you can see he's being disingenuous here. Moving on. You also labeled Black Lives Matter a terrorist organization. However, I couldn't find any official government designation of Black Lives Matter as a terrorist organization. The State Department doesn't have them on their list. Could you send the source over when you have a chance? Now, obviously, sarcasm, but again, here's another irony that you see from the left. This appeal to authority. So on one hand, they'll say, law enforcement's all racist. It's all systemically racist. But on the other hand, they'll say, oh, you say someone's bad? Prove to me from law enforcement that they're bad. So according to this person, I have to point out from it's only a racist or it's only a terrorist organization if the FBI claims so. So, for example, when the FBI thought that the KKK was a reasonable organization, when the Democrats were running it back at the turn of the 20th century, and we didn't even have an FBI, but federal law enforcement and law enforcement agencies around the country thought that the KKK was a stand-up organization, I suppose that this gentleman would be saying, oh, you can't criticize the KKK. If they're bad, then show me law enforcement saying they're bad. This appeal to authority is nonsense. I don't have to prove that the corrupt FBI that sought to have a coup against Donald Trump must declare an organization violent or a terrorist organization in order to show that they meet the definition of that. Are they using intimidation and violence to achieve a political end? Yes, then they're a terrorist organization. That's what they are. More importantly, you've not provided any evidence to support your assertion that BLM made things worse. I guess it falls on ideological lines rather than substantive data. That's not true. I showed in my original post what was going on, but I'll respond to this. To your second point, media bias is real and happens on both sides of the aisle. Your entire post is a mirror image of right-leaning media. Therefore, don't sound the alarm on the left while using the rhetoric of the right. That's absurd. The right-wing media is so far drummed out by left-wing media, it's ridiculous. This is another thing that you see happen on the left all the time. They control 95% of all the narrative, but they act like the fact that there's 5% of that narrative that they don't control proves that everything's even up. Of course, they're constantly trying to censor the remaining 5%. They want boycotts of Fox News, even though Fox is predominantly left-wing now, in my opinion, or at least predominantly anti-Trump. They go after independent content creators. They want to keep conservatives from speaking on campus. But then they point to those same conservatives and outlets and say, well, they exist, so therefore, it's ridiculous. And this is similar to the debate I had Monday, where they pretend, for example, that social media isn't biased towards the left. That's not living in reality. It's ridiculous. He goes on, there seems to be a misunderstanding of privilege on many of your threads. It has nothing to do with socioeconomic status of an individual, but rather it has to do with the color of our skin. Now, one of the things you'll notice, this is me talking in, not him. One of the things you'll notice with conversations of white privilege is they can't properly define it. Everyone who screams about the evils of white privilege, they'll all give you a different answer. They might be similar in some cases, but in some cases they're vastly different. So some people that I've talked to say white privilege is merely your ancestors were more privileged, so you had a better chance to be born in a better economic situation. Other people say, no. It's the fact that you can get a Band-Aid that matches your skin color. Or they'll say, your skin color has never been a detriment to you, therefore you have white privilege. But there's some sort of amalgamation of all of that. They can't define it amongst themselves, but then they'll criticize you for not agreeing with their ever-changing definition of what it is. But that's okay. Whatever he wants to define it as, I'll prove that it's nonsense, as you'll see. He says, white people have always had a system they could benefit from. That's not true. For example, did white people in East Asia in the 600 AD have a system they could benefit from? Or are you just talking this country? We'll see, because it's obvious he's not just talking this country. Yes, not every individual has benefited from it, and some are less likely to benefit due to socioeconomic status, sex, or past convictions, decisions. However, the system is designed to benefit us and was created for us to have an easier path forward. Non-white individuals enter a system which was not designed for their benefit. If that's true, and I've asked a million times, then why are there so many groups that are not white that outperform whites in most of the measures we look at to determine success in life? Like average salary, less likely to be incarcerated, less likely to have violence committed against them, etc. Filipino Americans, Jamaican Americans, Korean Americans, Vietnamese American, Hmong Americans, all of them outperform whites. So if the system was set up to benefit whites, all whites, that it was created by us to benefit us, it's doing a really crappy job, isn't it? Now, if we as whites have benefited from that privilege, but we're being outperformed by these other non-white groups, what's this person trying to say here? That white people are genetically inferior? Is that the argument? Because despite having our privilege, we're outperformed by so many other races. So it's a genetic issue then, right? See, the very people that claim that you're a racist, if you just give them a little rope, they'll show you that they're the actual racist ones. Non-white individuals enter a system, this is him again, which was not designed for their benefit. It's very binary. The same for sexual difference and male privilege. That's an important concession, as I'll get to later. See, this is, if you saw my debate a while back where I debated intersectionality, this is exactly I said how it's used. Now, of course, the person I was debating denied it, because that's the way that many leftists try to win a debate. They deny reality because they can't defend reality, because they know that we are right about how messed up these systems are and how racist and bigoted they are. So they have to deny reality. Oh, no, that's not what really happens. That's not what intersectionality is. But remember that concession. Male privilege and white privilege. Those are two sides. Those are two things that are going on simultaneously. Remember that for later. This is this person again. So let me quote. The same is true, the same for sexual difference in male privilege. We are regularly at less risk of harm due to the structure of our institutional system. As we look around the world, most power structures are led by someone who looks like us. We are taught mainly by people who look like us. We work for people who look like us. We look to police officers, judges, mayors, governors, and a president that looks like us. Okay, two things here. One, that's not true. In most of these cities like Minneapolis, the police force is actually majoritarily black. So already he's just lying about how the system works. Second, it's certainly not true everywhere in the world. This might blow your mind. But in Asia, most of the police officers, judges, politicians, are you ready for this? Are Asian. In Africa, most are African. And they look like the people that primarily come from those countries. So what is he talking about? Secondly, this isn't true. Remember, he conflated male and whiteness. I'll get to that point later. Let me skip that for now. But third, notice it's all about how they look. They look like us. How does that benefit you exactly? So let's say your president looks like you. Most Fortune 500 CEOs look like you. Their skin color is the same. They don't really look like you. They're wearing Armani suits and their hair's slicked back and things like that. But for all intents, they look like you as far as skin color. Why does that matter? Can someone explain that to me? Who do I have more in common with? The inner city black guy who's making the same amount of money I am? Living paycheck to paycheck? Or LeBron? Or Tom Brady? Me and Tom Brady look alike in the sense we're both white. I have nothing in common with Tom Brady. And this is the ridiculous nature of it. Why is it so important that people look like us? Again, who does it seem like is judging people based on the content of their character, and who is judging only by the color of their skin? Oh, someone looks like you, therefore that means something. What are you talking about? Meanwhile, he decries that people in positions of power look white. But if it's important to have people in positions of power that are similar to you, wouldn't it be important to have them be more ideologically similar to you than to share your skin color? So why is it that the same people that are concerned that all of these institutions have people that look like you, they're not concerned that they have people that think like you? And you know why? Because all of these institutions are dominated by people that are embracing left-wing extreme politics. So Goodyear has CEOs that might look like me, but they're embracing Black Lives Matter. And they have contempt for white people who are fragile and have privilege. The same is true of Congress. The same is true of Silicon Valley. The same is true of academia. All of these institutions are dominated by left-wing ideology. But they don't have a problem with that. They say, well, that's fine. So you should be judged based on your immutable characteristic of how you look. If someone in a position of power looks like you, that's all that matters. Who cares if they despise you? Who cares if they hate you? Who cares if they have nothing in common with you? As long as you share a skin color with them, well, then you have some sort of privilege. This is stupidity and racism is what it is. Right, Alpha Dress makes the correct point that lumping all whites together is nonsense as well. You used to have such as Irish, Eastern Europeans, etc., that were discriminated against despite being white and looking white. Moving on. Attempting to equate racism as a tool that impacts white people in the same way as it does black people is inaccurate. Okay? Now listen, he conflated, remember for later that he conflated racism with sexism. So men have privilege and whites have privilege, right? That's concession one that'll come back to bite him. This is number two. This is a big one. You ready? Let me quote. You ready? By definition, racism assumes benefiting from an overarching power structure and using it to disadvantage another person based on race. That's a clever way of saying you can't be racist towards white people. That's what he's saying. Now, one, that's outrageous. You do not need power in order to be racist. I could, for example, Let's say I would have a black neighbor. And if let's hypothetically, even though I'm not, though I'm sure someone will take this out of context. Let's say then that I would be racist. And I think, ooh, I don't like black people. I don't like having a black neighbor. Now, I have no political power. I have no financial power. And even beyond that, let's say that I'm totally polite to my black neighbor's face over and over and over and over again. And I pass away and my black neighbor's like, I thought Rob was a great guy. What a great guy. No idea that I used to harbor this, bigoted beliefs based on his race. Does that mean I wasn't racist then? Because I didn't use any power to harm my neighbor? No, I was still a racist. Now, I'm not a racist. I don't think like that, but I'm just giving you an example. So in that situation, I wouldn't need power to even be negative towards that person in a public way that affected him in order to still be a racist. Now, if the black neighbor hated me because I was white and I thought, hey, this guy's cool, he's always polite to me, does that mean he's not a racist? No, he's still a racist. Judging and hating people based on their skin color makes you a racist. Period. Even if you're a totally polite racist, even if you never use that racism to harm someone, you're still a racist. Therefore, racism doesn't require any sort of power. It doesn't even require acknowledgement. If it requires power, why does that power have to be politically and structured? Political and structured. Why? Let me give you an example. Let's say you were in a city, let's just pick one at random, Dallas, okay? And let's say the year was 2014, 2015, somewhere around then. And let's say there was a big march for, I don't know, let's say Black Lives Matter, okay? And let's say a black guy at that march decided he wanted to kill white people and cops. And he went out and he killed 5 police officers. So killing people based on their skin color, does that make you, was that power? Was that racism? No, that happened, by the way, that did happen. Now, that black guy, that murderer, he didn't have political power, but he still ended 5 people's lives. So what, we're not allowed to look at that as racism? This is nonsense. Everybody knows it's nonsense. So here you see, these people that claim to be so morally superior to you, just let them talk. Did you see how long it took down to get all this? He's on his second response to me. And just now he admits, oh, by the way, you can't be racist towards white people. You know what kind of person says that? A racist. If you say there are certain sins and crimes that you can't inflict on people because of the color of their skin, that's a racist belief. So there you have it. And that's Mick says, changing definitions to suit their agenda is the new normal for them and people. Absolutely right. Even on the right, submit to these new terms in debate, normalizing the idea of it. These type of ideas should be crushed where they stand. Exactly. That's why I'm confident to be against Black Lives Matter, to be against critical race theory and the intersectionalist. That's why I'm against cultural Marxism. That's why I'm against white supremacy. I'm against black supremacy. I'm against Hispanic supremacy. All of it. I don't care. I'm not going to leave you change the definition in order to be a racist or to justify your racism. You hate white people, but you think that doesn't make you a racist. So you change the definition to say, no, it's cool for me to hate people. It's cool for me to hold racist beliefs against white people because I've defined that as not racist. Sorry, it's still racism. Sorry. That's what it is. I don't care if you are white. You are engaged in racist practicing against white people. That's what you're doing. And I don't say this as woe is me, I'm a white person. I would say the exact same if they were saying it about Asian people. Well, Asians are doing really well in this country, so you can't be racist against Asian. Jewish people are doing really well, so you can't be racist against Jews. It's all nonsense. Do you hate someone for their skin color and ethnicity? Do you harbor prejudice beliefs against them because of their skin color or ethnicity? You're racist. I don't care if you have political power. I don't care what your skin color is. I don't care what your religion or political party is. You're a racist. Period. So we see the concession here. Now remember everything he says. So when he's saying, oh, George Floyd and systemic racism and blah, 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 blah. This is a person so disillusioned, just like most of the people in Black Lives Matter, they believe that you can't be racist towards white people. You think that influences what they believe that the lying media is telling them? All right, let's move on. The protests that have followed the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, etc. were what draw attention and generated the momentum for action. You've cited it took 4 days to charge Derek Chauvin, and even then they waited to take him into custody. The fact they located, arrested, arraigned, and charged the individual responsible for Cannon's death in less than 24 hours proves the hypocritical way that institutional racism operates. Okay, 2 things here. 1, no matter what, and I'm not saying there isn't bad police officers. I clearly am. It happens. I think that we over-demonize the police. I think that we've turned the pendulum swung so much more that there's no reason to ever consider being a police officer. I know great police officers, but sure, there are bad ones. And I have a problem with the way that we use police in this country a lot. For example, I think that instead of community policing in order to enforce justice and have the best possible communities, has largely, not through faults of the police necessarily, but through faults of the mayors and the people that control the police, have changed them into, fundraising mechanisms. Or arbitrarily enforcing laws to contain power. That's what I think's happened. There's worth having a discussion on that. But to claim that all police are bad or, systemic racist or something, it's nonsense without proof. So, having said that, and Brett Weinstein said this best. He's a leftist. He dislikes Trump. He said, giving the monopoly on force to law enforcement has been the best decision humans have made since we stopped defecating where we cook our food. In other words, any system where the police do not have the monopoly on power is anarchy. It's blood in the streets. Now, will there be problems with giving a government institution the monopoly on power? Absolutely. But it's the best we have right now. You cannot not have a police force. That world looks way worse. So we have to acknowledge the police are necessary and do our best in order to make sure that system is least corrupt as possible. And yes, we have work to do. Absolutely. But because they have a monopoly on force, it makes it more difficult to have an open and shut case about a misuse of force. For example, if I kneeled on George Floyd's neck and I'm not a police officer, in the same fashion, and it was filmed, open and shut. I have no right, there is no situation, barring he was trying to sexually assault someone or murder someone, that would allow me to do that. But when a police officer does it, and the police officer's story is, this was necessary, and sometimes some force of restraint is necessary, then it's not an open and shut case. So actually, 4 days to charge a police officer is an incredibly fast time. But, of course, they'll ignore that reality. Now, remember, my friend here who's saying this, he would have been the first person to say that Darren Wilson should have been locked up immediately and probably executed. Only it turns out Darren Wilson was innocent. Hands up, don't shoot with Michael Brown was a lie. Michael Brown reached for Darren Wilson's gun and tried to kill him. And Darren Wilson fought for his life back and shot Michael Brown. That's what happened. But the same people saying 4 days for an arrest, that's way too long, said the same thing with Darren Wilson in the Michael Brown situation. And they rioted. And that was a lie. Because it turns out you can't always believe the one-sided media that wants to push this racial division. And, as I'll respond to him, what about the case of Tony Timpa? Again, this is his case he's making right here, that this is racism. The fact they located, arrested, and arraigned the individual responsible for Cannon's death in 24 hours proves the hypocritical way that institutional racism operates. So in other words, it took 4 days to arrest George Floyd's killer, and it only took 1 to arrest Cannon Hinton. So that proves institutional racism. Okay, well, if it took longer to arrest a police officer that killed Tony Timpa, who was a white man, does that prove institutional racism? I'll ask him that question. He says, again, you equate neoliberalism with anti-blackness and white privilege. They are different and operate in different levels. Once you realize that, you can start to understand how these things are related to one another. Capitalism and neoliberalism positioning themselves with BLM is a way for those institutions to insulate themselves from public institutions of government and law that are being attacked. I agree 100%. Absolutely. Except it's more than just that. So basically the argument he's making here is Nike doesn't really care about Black Lives Matter. That's true, they don't. And neither does Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. They don't care. So he acknowledges that. Oh, no. They're just trying to insulate. They don't want to get the mob to be violent towards them. They don't want that. Yes, you're absolutely right. Only they go further. They know that actually pushing that racial division is beneficial in its own right. Because someone might look at those corporations and they might look at those politicians and say, well, they've screwed poor people over. And therefore, poor people should rightfully be angry at them. So one, they're insulating themselves by endorsing the message of Black Lives Matter. But second, they're distracting people from the real elites that seek to dominate this country. The globalist, etc. How could you on one hand believe, and everyone I talk to says this, oh no, the institutions are just pretending to support Black Lives Matter because it benefits them financially. Vote for Joe Biden. It's so funny. It's laughable. Meanwhile, say what you will about him, before the lockdowns, Trump was doing more economically for the black community than any president in recent history. Trump actually signed the prison reform bill that got out a lot of nonviolent black offenders. That's a law that black leaders and Democrats clamored for under Obama, couldn't get it. Donald Trump gave it to them. So what exactly has Trump done that's worse for black people than former presidents? Well, he's not saying Black Lives Matter like Joe Biden, so it's funny how these hypocrites, on one hand, they'll say, well, the fact that Nike and, all these people and organizations are saying Black Lives Matter, that's just them being capitalist. They don't really care about that. But then on the other hand, going like, we need a leader like Joe Biden. He clearly cares about Black Lives Matter. Really? What did his administration do when he was vice president? Anything? He help out the black community? I didn't see it. Also, note the attack on capitalism there. That's another crucial admission. And you'll see that later. And he finishes, George Floyd died at the hand of police officers who when he didn't need to. They used their power and privilege and used it to kill an individual. Okay. Then they have been solely protected by the same system. Okay, even if I conclude that. Concluding here, I'm not sure you'll never agree because I don't believe that a single act of death is what the media is focusing on here. If we can't see the difference between tragedy and justice, we'll probably never see it. I'm going to skip my comments, but let's just go to his and get to the few concessions. He says, do you believe in such a thing as institutional racism, privilege, etc.? Can one be racist? Can one exert privilege? Do you believe in a post-racial area? Yes, I believe that there is institutional racism. Yes, I believe in racism. This is the person who doesn't believe you could be racist to someone depending on what their skin color is. So if you're white, you can't be racist against you. That's his belief. So the fact that he asks me these sarcastic questions like, oh, so you don't believe in racism? No, that's you. I quite easily, where have I ever suggested a post-racial system? I haven't. In fact, I say the opposite. The more we focus on race and divide people by race, the more racists you create. Black Lives Matter leads to the increase in white nationalists, which then leads to an increase in Black Lives Matter. The white nationalists and the black nationalists love each other. They're two sides of the same coin. Yes, it clearly exists. Racism will always exist. That's a tragedy. It always will. What we can do is minimize its effect and shame those that engage in it. Like people that say you need to be punished for the sins of your forefathers based on your skin color. Oh, like Black Lives Matter and all of the Democrats that are supporting it. Yes, we should reject them. Do I believe in institutional racism? Now, this is a more difficult question, but yes, of course I can. Slavery was institutional racism. Do I believe that that's all ended? Probably not. Show me the specific example and I'll take it. For example, I could show you a specific example of institutional racism. Yale, affirmative action policies. Democrats in California trying to overturn Proposition 209. Proposition 209, for those that don't know, says that the government may not hire or may not privilege or discriminate people for jobs based on race, gender, religion, etc. It's the Democrats that want to remove that. So yes, they are reaching for actual institutional racism. Not institutional because it primarily affects one race or another. That's what you're trying to claim with our law enforcement. Institutional in that it says in its definition that it is privileging or detrimenting people based on their race. That's blatant institutional racism, but you're for that. Now, do I believe privilege exists? Yes. The problem is, look. All right, let me go back to the chat here for a minute. Donald J. Trump watching me. What's up, Donald? You're in PA today too, huh? Let's see. from the UK. Thanks, Big Papa. What I think of George Soros, terrible. He's trying to infiltrate his way. I mean, he's with the globalists trying to destroy this country in the West. The same people who tell you there are only a few bad apples in BLM will go on to scream that all cops are bastards. The irony. Absolutely, great point. And that's a point I make quite often. In fact, they'll go further than that. Remember, they would find an image of someone at the Tea Party doing something bad, and that proved that all the Tea Party was horrible racist. But I could show you hundreds of examples of Black Lives Matter engaged in violence or covering up violence, and they're like, no, that's not Black Lives Matter. Just a few bad apples. One cop does something, it proves institutional racism. Thousands of Black Lives Matter supporters do something. No. Alpha says 4 days for an arrest is hella quick. Absolutely. They don't realize that you have to get it right or else the officer can sue and get money. Yes. And again, the fact that the officer can legitimately use force. Like, for example, if never mind. It's a bad example. Screw the Tea Party. They sold out, but the point is, regardless of what you think of the Tea Party, it's clear that the establishment sought to denigrate everyone that was involved in it by the actions of one or two people, but it's the exact opposite with Black Lives Matter. White privilege. Okay. Here's what I think about privilege. Privilege exists. I'm not saying white privilege doesn't exist. I'll tell you right now. I'll say it as clear as day. White privilege exists. But so does black privilege. And so does Asian privilege. And so does Hispanic privilege. And so is male privilege. And so is female privilege. And so is straight privilege. And so is LGBT privilege. And so is Muslim privilege. And so is Christian privilege. And so does atheist privilege. And so does young privilege. So does old privilege. So does fat people privilege. So does thin people privilege. So does attract people privilege, so does ugly people privilege. And guess what? In all of those groups that I just said, with all of that privilege, this might blow your mind too. Adversity exists for all of those races, all of those categories as well. Wait, what? See, it turns out the world's not super simple. That people are bad or they're oppressors based on their skin color, and they're good or they're oppressed based on their skin color. That's garbage. White people are oppressors, and black people are oppressed. But black people are also oppressors, and white people are also oppressed. Wait, what? You mean people aren't evil or good just based on their skin color? Yep, I said it. Or based on their gender? Yep. Or based on their sexual preference? Yep. Or based on their religion? Yep. Or based on their wealth? Yep. You see? Isn't that weird? Life's not super simple like that. That's what the cultural Marxists want you to believe, though. They want you to believe that you're not an individual. You're just a group of categories. Immutable characteristics. I'm not Rob Noor, an individual with my own thoughts. I'm Rob Noor, straight, white, Christian, male, fat, victim, And then all those categories that they deem oppressors are bad. And being fat, though, I'm a victim. So despite all of these oppressor groups that I belong in, if I embrace my victimhood, then I'm a good person. Then I'm morally virtuous. Let me give you an example of white privilege. I would say it's probably true. If you get pulled over by police, there's probably some small percentage that they're less likely to feel threatened by you if you're white than if you're black. Now, I'm not saying that's right, but when you see the amount of incredible violent crime that occurs in the black community, police officers are humans as well. And this privilege, the same sort of privilege exists for the old compared to the young. If you pull over some young strapping dude who's got his pants halfway down around his butt, he's a white guy, but he's got facial piercings all through his face and spiked hair, tattoos of guns and knives on his face, cops are probably going to approach that person potentially thinking he's a threat more than a black person who's 75 and a walker, white hair, pictures of his grandkids on the dashboard. Is that white privilege? Or is it black privilege that they're more likely to be antagonistic towards the young white guy? No. It's because that's the experience of these police officers. Again, that doesn't make it right. It does not make it right. But it's inevitable. And our job should be stereotypes are inevitable. It's true. It's our job to fight back against them as much as possible. If you believe a stereotype in your life, that doesn't make you an evil person. Now, if you act with animus towards someone based on that stereotype, or if you're refusing to let go of that stereotype when the individual shows that it's wrong, I'll give you a perfect example of me using a stereotype. One time I was at work. I do home health care, so I'm basically at work by myself with, a person that we take care of. And so I was working overtime at a different house, and I'm waiting for the other staff to come in and relieve me. And I don't know the other staff. So I meet him for the first time, and he's like a 6'6" black guy. And he comes in, he's like, "Hey, what's up?" And I'm like, "No, not much, just talking." And you got to do stupid stuff like count money, count pills, stuff like that. Just to make sure when one person leaves the house, everything's in order, and then the next person can start. That way things don't get lost in the shuffle. Usually takes about an hour. So we call this a crossover. So the crossover's occurring, and you make chit chat, especially if it's someone you don't know. Oh, how about the weather? Oh, what car are you driving? So we go through that stuff. And then I say, "Hey man, did you watch," it happened to be this time of the season. I say, "Did you watch the NBA All-Star game? Did you see that slam dunk contest? It was pretty crazy." And he was just like, "No." Now, was there part of me that said that because he was a tall black guy that I was like, "Hey, this guy looks athletic. He's probably into basketball." Was there part of me that said that? Maybe. I don't know. Now, he didn't act crappy about it or anything like that. But then in my head, this is how stupid I am. Like, he's probably thinking, "Oh, yeah, because I'm a black guy. Thanks for asking me about basketball." And I thought the perfect response for him would have been like, "No, I didn't watch the NBA All-Star game. Did you watch that hot dog eating contest last night, fatty?" I'd have been like, "Touche." Good comeback, But if I see a really tall, athletic person, particularly a black person, could be any tall, athletic person, and I'm like, "Wow, that person looks athletic. They're probably good at basketball." And I talk to them, and they go, "Actually, I've never played basketball in my life. Actually, I'm an engineer. Graduated top of my class from MIT." Now, if I keep going, "Nah, you're a dumb jock. You're just a dumb jock." Now I'm negatively using a stereotype. But if I'm willing to go, "Oh, you kind of look like someone who was tall and athletic. I assumed you'd be into it." Now I know more specific information, and the stereotype's no longer relevant. But anyone who tells you they don't use stereotypes is a liar. It's inevitable. It's built into us evolutionary-wise. Do you think it would have benefited our ancestors to be like, "Oh, a saber-toothed tiger. I don't want to stereotype it. Maybe it's one of those peaceful tigers." No. That's just the way. That doesn't make you a bad person. If you see a white person, if you're black and you see a white person and you're like, "They probably come from a wealthy family," that doesn't make you a bad person. Now, if you talk to me and I say, "No, my family grew up dirt poor, blah, blah, blah," and you're just like, no, you're rich, then that's bad. You're falsely engaging in a stereotype after it's been shown to you it wasn't true. But you're not bad for that initial reaction. I don't blame you at all. No problem. That's it. I don't know how much more clear to make it. So privilege exists for all of these groups. Now, here's another thing that's going to blow your mind. You ready? The privileges that they focus on, like race and gender, they're small potatoes. You want to talk about the privileges? Let me tell you about the privileges I have. All right? The ones that really matter. I have two parents that really cared about me. And despite the fact they were poor, they busted their ass to bring me up this way. That's privilege. That's a privilege that matters. I have a wife and family and community that care about me and have my back. That's privilege that matters. Absolutely. I was born in the greatest country in the history of the world, the United States. That's privilege. I was born in the past 50 years. That's privilege. Do you understand that humanity up until the turn of the 20th century was dark and horrible for pretty much everyone? Do you get that? It didn't matter if you're a man or white or black. You might say it was slightly worse for this person than another, but as a whole, it was tough. The average person in the West before 1900 lived, in today's value, under less than $1 a day. That's tough. That's brutal. And that's just recorded history. If you are alive today and you're in the United States and you were born without some crippling health problem, terminal illness or something, you are amongst the most privileged of people that have ever existed. If you have the ability to be online, you're of the most privileged of the privileged. If you're at university, so what are we quibbling about here? What's really going on to all these people screaming about white privilege? Even if we embrace the lie that whiteness is just privilege, even if we embrace that, what are they really saying? Well, as a white person in the United States that's alive today, you're 99.00001 of the most privileged people ever to exist. Or 0.2, 99.002 of the most privileged people to ever exist. But as a black person born in the United States today, you're 99.001 of the most privileged to ever exist. Really, we're going to quibble about that 0.001%? That's what we're quibbling about here? So much so that someone with way more privilege than the average white or black person, like Oprah, could lecture other people about their privilege. Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot. When you start playing this privilege game, you could always play it more. You think, I'm a white man, right? So you might be sitting there and saying, well, I'm a black man. So, Rob, you're more privileged than me. So you'll never know what it's like to be a black man. Sorry, Rob. But then there's a black woman next to you and goes, oh, well, now that we're talking about privilege, Mr. Black Man, as a black woman, you're far more privileged than me. But then there's someone next to the black woman who goes, oh, but you're a black straight woman and I'm a black lesbian woman. So you're more privileged than me. And then the next person goes, yes, but I'm a black lesbian trans woman. So you're more privileged. And then the next person says, yes, but I'm black, lesbian, trans, and disabled. So you're more privileged than me. And then the next person says, yes, I'm all of those things, but I'm also very, very young, which makes you're in your, adult years. So you're more privileged than me. And on and on. And then what do we get? Who's more privileged? A disabled white man or a black trans woman? A rich autistic man or a poor attractive man? Like, it doesn't, what are we doing? And then, as Jordan Peterson correctly identifies, ultimately, when you play this game, you understand there are infinite ways to play it. There are infinite groups. There are infinite privileges that we could talk about. The biggest victim at the end, when you take this out to the logical, you know who's going to be at the end? The individual. That's exactly why the identity politics is stupid. Well, it's normally true of this group, and it's normally true of that group, and it's normally... Yes, but it's not true in this specific instance, right? So when Oprah talks about privilege, and she could talk about white privilege, why do we only talk about that? We could stack up all the privileges that Cannon Hinton had versus the privileges that Oprah had. How about that? How about we do that? And then we decry Oprah's privileges. Sure, we'll give Cannon Hinton whiteness. Let's see how that's stacked up against, I don't know, not being murdered when you're 5 years old. Furthermore, as I said earlier, if you say, I have these privileges, well, privilege implies that you should do your best to give that privilege up to someone who's underprivileged. So why aren't you giving up your station, Oprah, or your money, or whatever, to someone who's less privileged? It's easy to sit around and say, hey, I'm privileged. Do something about it. Yeah, blue lives do matter. Dude, read your comments. Why are the hoods in America black? There's a reason. I have a gray hoodie. I also have a white hoodie. So I don't know what that comment meant. But yes, the idea of white privilege is racist. That's exactly what it is. Now, I don't mind talking about it, but the way it's used is racism. Penguin says the first step is recognizing the problem. Yes, what's the problem? And that's the problem with Black Lives Matter. The reason they won't solve the problem, the reason they only make things worse, is that they haven't been honest about what the problem is. If you want to talk about Black Lives Mattering, then you should isolate what is causing the most harm to Black lives. And when it comes to instances of blacks being killed, it is clear that black on black crime is the overwhelming culprit of that. Now, there could be many reasons for that, and we should seek to address those reasons. But focusing all of our time on the 14 unarmed blacks that were shot by the police last year, as opposed to the 7,000 that were shot by other black people, is exactly why the problem will never get solved. Because the people focusing on the police aren't intending to solve the problem. If they were, they would be as outraged and be marching in the streets when Tony Timpa was murdered, or when Daniel Shaver was murdered. Or if they were just outraged by black people dying, they would be outraged when David Dorn died. You know, the black former police officer / security guard that was killed by a Black Lives Matter protester. But they're not. They're only outraged by what they could use to benefit themselves politically. So when they're not recognizing the problem, they'll never be able to solve the problem. So yes, that's my answer to this person's question. Does privilege exist? Yes. Is there institutional racism? Can be. That's my answer. Now, moving on, just a little more with this. He says, mainstream media has an ideological slant to it, period. It's easy for all of us to point to a news story to support something. I think trying to extrapolate the warrants behind the story is more important. Right, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm extrapolating the warrants behind the story, the reason that the media is covering things. What is their reasoning for that? It's to push a racial divide. It's to push anti-Trump garbage. It's to keep the establishment in power. And pushing a racial divide is a great way to do that. That's why they talked about Nick Sandman. That's why they didn't talk about Cannon Hinton. Coverage of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, or anyone else killed at the hands of a police officer when they didn't have to be is not being reported on due to the single act of death, but rather what it actually represents. Yes, and they choose what it represents. To me, what that represents is bad policing, corruption possibly amongst police officers, and justice not being served. But that's not what they point to, is it? They point to, this proves racism, and they have no evidence that's the case. He continues, it represents an abuse of power in a system of political and legal stacked against people of color. No, it doesn't. It does not. Any more than me saying the fact that blacks are 48 times more likely to commit a violent crime against whites represents a system stacked against whites of blacks using incredible violence against them. Therefore, if you cover the Cannon Hinton story, it represents the injustices brought to white people. That is not what I suggested. He continues. Now, this part's very important. So he said, remember, what did he say in a previous post? Well, you see, Cannon Hinton's killer was brought to justice in 1 day. It took 4 days for George Floyd's. That proves institutional racism, thereby implying, had George Floyd been white, his killer would have been arrested in 1 day. So I bring up Tony Timpa, the video of which I showed you. White man killed by police in the similar way of George Floyd, whose officers were never arrested. He says, you ready for this? Pointing out the death of Tony Timpa doesn't nullify my argument. Rather, it proves it. See? There is a system of injustice dealt to individuals by the police, and the systems do not hold those responsible accountable. That's not his assertion. You see how he quite cleverly changes his position there? My argument from the get-go has been, and I quote, there's a system of injustice dealt to individuals by police, and the systems don't hold those responsible accountable. That's been my position. Yes, sometimes that's the truth. His position was, no, that's systemic racism. Now when I say, how can you prove that? He says, well, Cannon Hinton's killer was arrested because Cannon Hinton's white and a black man killed him. But George Floyd was black and a cop killed him, so that proves racism. And when I'm like, but a white guy who died by the hands of a cop, that cop wasn't charged. So is that racist against the white guy? He says, yes, this proves my argument. It proves some cops are bad. So this is what's going on. Let me make the analogy as clear as possible. Let's say I'm a bus driver, and on my bus is a 12-year-old white kid and black guy, and they're spitting spitballs at me, right? And I turn around, and I go, and I slap the black kid in the face. Does that prove that I'm racist? Me slapping that black kid as a white bus driver proves I'm racist, right? I use violence against a black person, therefore I'm racist. But then I immediately reach over and I slap the white kid. Does that prove I'm racist against white people? Nah, that just proves I'm a bad bus driver. You see how this works? The same action could occur to two different people of two different colors. And on one action, we assume that the action occurred because of the race. But in the other action, we assume, it had nothing to do with race. That's the game they play. This is a cult. There is no evidence you could give them. Any situation you could be, I could show you 50 videos of people like Tony Timpa, white people being killed by police and the police not being brought to justice, and you would still be like, yeah, that proves systemic racism against black people. Proves it. It's ridiculous. And you'll see how it gets more ridiculous here more. Penguin says the difference is the killer is a police officer. Yes, the killer of Tony Timpa was a police officer. In fact, one of the officers was black. Tony Timpa was a white man. So that proves systemic racism against white people, right, Penguin? Right? That has to be what it proves, right? I'll wait for proof. So far, I've been waiting for months. Someone show me that George Floyd died because he was black. Anyone? Can anyone show me proof? The only proof is a white person wouldn't have died like that. Yes, they would have. Here's Tony Timpa. And the cops got less punished than they did in the case of George Floyd. So how's that prove racism again? It doesn't, and they know it. And they just assert it does. Just like the fact that blacks are 2.5 times more likely to be shot by police doesn't prove racism. What we should do is look at the reasoning behind it. Let's go on. So you see, black man killed by police proves police are racist. White man killed by police face less justice than when they killed the black man proves the police are bad, but not racist against whites. He says, again, none of this has to do with a single death. Rather, it deals with the amplification of violence done towards folks by those in power and the systems in place to protect them. That's not what your argument was. No one would disagree with that. When people abuse their station of power, it's a horrible injustice. What people disagree with is saying if they do it against a black person, that proves it's racist. And if they do it against a white person, that doesn't prove racism against white people. Because now we're no longer focused on people abusing power. Now we're focused on racism. And all of a sudden, a bunch of people that are abusing their position of power, such as these Democratic mayors, such as places like Nike that have sweatshops, they're avoiding criticism by shouting Black Lives Matter. He continues. Radical violence cuts both ways. Charlottesville, now notice how they love to bring up Charlottesville. Charlottesville was terrible. It was newsworthy. The person who killed that woman that was apparently a white supremacist deserves the maximum sentence if it's, okay. And they bring up Charlottesville, and that was the biggest story in the country and proved white supremacists were around every corner. But when I could bring up thousands of instances of violence in Black Lives Matter, including over 30 people now killed in the resultant riots since George Floyd's dead, none of that seems to matter. That's just that's just one bad apple. That's just one bad apple. But there's still, oh my God, Charlottesville. Oh. Yes, Charlottesville was serious. Yes, it was worth looking at. Yes, it's worth criticizing. But the fact that that was used as a result that, there's white supremacists running rampant everywhere. Again, the data doesn't lie. Blacks are 48 times more likely to commit violent crime against a white than vice versa. Does that mean I dislike blacks? No. Does that mean if some white supremacist wants to cite that and show why black people are inferior, they're a good person or I agree with them? No. I hate racial identitarians. I hate race supremacists. If they're white, if they're black, I don't care. But if you're going to push this racist crap, if you're going to push the argument that white people are out there systemically brutalizing black people, then it's worth looking at the data, which proves you're exactly wrong. He says Charlottesville proves there are white protest movements that use violence to achieve political end. Yep. Did anybody approve of that? Anyone in a position of authority? Did I approve of that? Nope. Okay, let's see what he thinks. So what he's saying here, I say Black Lives Matter uses violence. He says, well, these white groups use violence. Okay, yeah, I never said that white groups can't use violence. Of course they can. And that's horrible too. Now let's see if he's willing to condemn the violence on Black Lives Matter. You ready? Let's see what he says. Now keep in mind the context of what he's about to say. I say there is violence that we've seen through Black Lives Matter, either them perpetuating it or deflecting or ignoring it, right? His response to that is, quote, the civil rights movement used violence to achieve a political end, even one you'd probably agree with. Hell, we fought for our independence from England in the same manner. Your dictionary definition of terrorism serves your own purpose, but when applied holistically causes you a number of problems with your logic. In other words, what he's saying without saying is, of course there's violence with Black Lives Matter. It's like the revolution. It's good. Do you see? Do you see what's going on? No. Person I'm arguing with, looting a target and shooting the security guard and murdering him is not the same as our forefathers fighting a war for independence against the British tyranny. It's not the same at all. And it again shows, you see, this is why I do these debates. This is why I engage both on my channel and through writing with these sorts of debates. Because if you let people talk enough, they'll tell you what they really think. When I debated that Twitch streamer Destiny, left-wing streamer, it took almost an hour and a half for him to say exactly what I was trying to get him to say. It was like pulling teeth, just getting it real slow. And at the end of it, I said, and I'm being polite because I'm arguing in good faith, and I thought he was very polite to me the whole time. We raised our voices a couple times, but I said this, the conspiracy theorist in me thinks that mayors like de Blasio are allowing these riots to occur because they think it'll hurt Donald Trump and look bad for him. And he says that's not a conspiracy theory at all. That's exactly what's happening. And it's a good thing. You see? Now, he wouldn't have said that right out front, but once you talk to someone in the context of this long debate that's going on, you get these little truths. So he had the little truth. It was about capitalism. He had the little truth. You can't be racist to white people. He has the truth. The violence is occurring, but it's like the Revolutionary War, so it's a good thing. You see? You see what's happening? This is the same guy that will be all over social media saying Black Lives Matter is a peaceful movement. Oh, yeah, it's not about demonizing white people. It's peaceful. No, it's not Marxism or anything. It's just about justice for George Floyd. But once you get in the context of a debate, they can't help themselves. Continues, your attempts to point out where white privilege doesn't exist only reifies the privilege you focus on. So we're talking about the DOJ saying that Yale was discriminatory against whites and Asians. Here's his reason why that's not the case. He says, Yale is currently 42.7% white and 5.8% black. Any issue with those stats? No, I don't have an issue of that because I believe in merits. I don't believe on equality of outcomes. That's what your side believes. You believe that if 13% of the population is black, then every college, every job, every institution should be 13% black. Oh, wait, you don't believe that though, do you? Just like you believe if 51% of the country's female, then everything should be 51% female. But you don't believe that, do you? Because, for example, I could look to the NBA. Well, the NBA is overwhelmingly black. Would you like to see only 13% of the NBA be black? You'll say no, but the people in the NBA got there through their hard work. I agree. They're the best players. The NBA is sort of a hyper-capitalism. No, yes, they're engaged in a woke messaging, but competitive sports is a form of capitalism where you end up, if you want to win at all costs, which is what competitive sports are about, you end up not caring about superficial things like skin color. They don't care about gender either. If a woman could throw a 110-mile-an-hour fastball and strike everyone out and have an ERA under 1, she'd get hired by all 30 teams in the MLB. No question. They wouldn't be like, but we hate women. You help us win a World Series? Get in here. Yes, it used to be different. But ever since the days of Jackie Robinson, people realized their stupidity. And some of these black professionals, when given the same opportunity as whites, outshined them in many ways. We don't proceed to hamper black professionals in these sports by saying, oh, no, you're special. You don't have to try harder. We'll guarantee you a position on the team. Nope, if you're black, you're automatically in the MLB. Then their skills would diminish because they don't have to accept individual responsibility and be as competitive. But that is what we do in the black community in other ways. It's the same with men versus women. Oh, well, Fortune 500 CEOs, half of them should be women if half the population is women. Really? Does that mean half of the prison population should be women? Should half of sewage workers be women? Half of bricklayers be women? Half of crab boat fishermen be women? Or how about this? We know that women overwhelmingly are in professions like the nursing profession, 75 to 80% of them. Does that mean we need to fire 30% of the women to make room for men? The humanities is 75% women. Do we need to go through university and kick 25% of the women out to even the number with men? They selectively apply this. So no, I don't have a problem with those statistics person I'm arguing with. Not at all. Why would I? He brings up these statistics because what he's trying to tell you is, oh, see, Yale only has about 6% black student body, when blacks make up 13% of the population. Therefore, I don't mind if they're discriminating against Asians and whites. That's what embracing the ideology of equality of outcome, which leads to Marxism, this is what it leads to. It's okay for me to personally be racist or unjust to an individual in the name of the group. That's nonsense. He says, the DOJ was pushed to publish the statistics you cite. It's hard for me to believe the executive agencies pushing the data is really providing valid evidence for a warranted argument. I don't even understand what he's trying to say. You clearly found the evidence quite simply. I Googled it and found it quite simply as well. So what? The DOJ didn't include with the fact of these people are discriminatory. Oh, but by the way, 5.8% of the student body is black. What does that have to do with anything? Imagine me saying the opposite. Imagine if, you prove a case that a specific police department acted in a racial biased manner against a group of black people. And I say, oh, actually, they've arrested a lot of white people. You'd say, so? And? Were they racist against these black people or not? Who cares if they arrested white people? If you show evidence they are racist against the white people, we'll look at it. Otherwise, what does that have to do with what we're talking about? See how their position changes all of a sudden? So he has no problem. DOJ comes out and says, now wasn't this the person before that said, I won't believe something's a terrorist group unless the FBI says it. But now when the DOJ says, hey, here's an act of discrimination. And I don't just believe the DOJ because they're the DOJ. I believe it because I've looked this up and talked about Yale and Harvard and their admission practices for years. And the clear bias, particularly against whites, but even more so against Asian American students. It's been an open secret for years. We all knew it, but people on the left don't care. Why? You can't be racist against white people. You can't. So it's okay. Now, one of the arguments I push back against with him, with the idea that there is no such thing as, or there's always white privilege, is this. If there's white privilege, why is it that all of us know? See, here's the thing. We talk about these highfalutin philosophical ideas in our ivory towers in academia and in politics and stuff like that. But you know what? The real world doesn't care. It doesn't care at all, right? So you could have this idea in theory all you want. What's it look like in practice in the real world? Let me tell you a little something that every American knows. Anyone who's remotely followed this story knows. I don't care if you're a Black Lives Matter supporter, if you're against Black Lives Matter, if you're white, if you're black, if you're Republican or Democrat. We all know this is the truth. Let's say that you're a business owner and you're in inner city Chicago or Minneapolis or DC or New York or any other number of cities where we've seen riots and protests, right? And let's say you see that the street down the way last night, all the businesses got burned there. Now, you're going to try, you know that there's going to be more riots and protests. You don't want your building burnt. You determine that you're going to, the best way you could keep your building from getting burnt is to let the people in these mobs know who owns the building. You have two choices. You can either write white-owned business on the outside of the building, or you could write minority-owned business on the outside of the building. Which one are you writing? Everyone with any common sense knows that every single business owner is going to be like, minority-owned business. We're a minority-owned business. Why? What about white privilege? You're so white. There's so much white privilege. You would just write, I'm white. I own this business, so back off. It's my privilege. Right? Isn't that how it works? So why are they writing minority-owned business? What's the deal with that? What do you think's going on there? What do you think it could be? Oh, because these mobs, these Democrat brown shirts, are more likely to attack white-owned businesses. Isn't that a great privilege? Isn't that fantastic? Now, does that mean that there aren't disadvantages to being black at times? Of course not. or Hispanic or Asian or Jewish or white or male or female or Christian or Muslim, etc., etc., etc. Yes, there are privileges and detriments to every group depending on where you're at, when you're at, all of these situations. It's freaking complicated. Why do we only focus on white privilege or male privilege? Why do you think that is? Because it's not actually about recognizing problems. It's about attacking those groups. That's what it's about. It's about bigotry or racism against those groups. So I bring this up to him. Why do they write minority-owned business? What do you think he says? Well, okay. Now, an honest person would say, okay, in that context, yes, I guess it's detrimental to be white. But I still think that on balance, it's more privileged to be white than black. That would at least be a good faith argument. Let's see if that's what the person I'm talking to does. The fact that you need to identify as a minority-owned business is problem enough. Capitalism is hella white and racist. The mere fact that you have minority-owned businesses versus the big box stores is a problem with society today. Now, one, notice how that totally avoids the conversation. Just totally deflects from it. Oh, well, the fact that you're minority-owned business and you're competing against Walmart, that's a problem. What? What does that have to do with mobs burning down white-owned businesses? What does that have anything to do with it? Nothing. He just deflects because he can't be honest. That's the way these people are. They can't argue in good faith. Again, my position's easy to argue because I am not making a position that is so... I'm not saying that institutional racism can't exist. I'm not saying that racism can't exist. I'm just saying that it goes both ways and that it's detrimental to focus on only one side of it. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying you can't be racist against people of a certain skin color. That's their side. Him and Oprah believe the statement, as does everyone who argue with me on there, white people always have their privilege. That doesn't mean bad things can't happen to white people, but their skin color will always be a privilege. That's not true. And so once you make that statement, when someone shows you an obvious truth, here's a guy who killed white people because he said he hates white people. Now, how is their skin color a privilege? They have to deny it. When I say they're burning down white businesses, and we know it, that's why people are writing minority-owned businesses. He has to deflect. He has to say, because he's already made this statement, it's always a privilege to be white. That's clearly wrong. It's clearly wrong. But they have to act like that. Because if they don't, and if they admit, yeah, sometimes there's detriment to being white too. And sometimes there's privilege to being black. And sometimes there's privilege to being male. And sometimes privilege to being female. If they admit that, then they have to answer, why do you only focus on one of them? So they have to say, oh, no, it only exists one way. That's what they have to do. So that's what's going on here. And then second, notice right here, the admission. This is about fighting capitalism. Capitalism's hella white. Okay. I'm more than happy. You go ahead. Hey, I don't mind if you're a Marxist. Just be honest. Tell people. I'm sick and tired of people covering for Black Lives Matter, acting like everyone I talk to, almost everyone. In fact, let me say 70% of the people I've talked to in debates online identify as socialist or Marxist and say that's part of Black Lives Matter. But then they pretend, oh, but that's not what the movement's about. That's just my interpretation. I have seen Sam Harris' podcast on this. So it's against capitalism. Got it. We can have a capitalism versus Marxism debate any day of the week. How's Marxism working out for people of color? How'd that work out in China? How'd that work out in the Ukraine during the Soviet Union? 100 million dead, not enough for you? We need more? Okay. Then he goes on. I was talking about the Covington kids. Was it white privilege? Can you give me, imagine this. What if I told you this happened? Let's say you were in a coma for 5 years and you woke up and I said this. Hey, these KKK members surrounded this group of black kids and they started yelling racial slurs at them and homophobic slurs, right? And then a guy watched these KKK members yelling at these black kids and he said, yeah, the KKK is telling some harsh truths there. And so then he got in the face of these black kids and one of those black kids smirked at him. And so the media was like, can you believe that? The gall of that black kid? That black kid had a punchable face. We're going to find out where that black kid goes to school. We're going to attack him. We're going to do everything we can to bring these black kids down. Those KKK guys were good dudes yelling at those black kids. The guy that stuck up for the KKK, he's a hero that got in their face. If I told you that, you would be like, there's no way in hell that happened. There is no way. There would be riots on the street. Every news agency that reported that story would be burned to the ground. We know, everyone knows, there's no way that could happen. None. Yet, when you had a bunch of black supremacists yelling at white kids, and a guy watching those black supremacists say, hey, they're telling some harsh truths to these kids, then get in the kid's face, then have his buddy yell racial slurs or racial comments at the white kids, then lie about being surrounded, and the media totally embraced them, totally defended the adult racist and attacked the kids. Why? Because they were white and they were Trump supporters. That kid's name was Nick Sandmann. Was that white privilege? Let's see what the person debating me says. What do you think he's going to say? You think he'll say, well, but. Do you think that's what he's going to say? Well, do you think he'll say, well, it wasn't as bad as that. Well, it was a mistake. What do you think he's going to say? You might be shocked to hear. You ready? More importantly, Nick Sandmann is the epitome of white privilege. And that's all I'll read further. Do you get that? That's who I'm arguing with. That's a debater. That was one of the better debaters in the country. Now, how do you think I stack up against that? You think I'm doing pretty well? Yes. Alpha, standing in front of someone and smiling. A racist. Standing in front of racists that scream racial and homophobic things at you, and then a man who gets in your face defending those racists while his buddy right beside him screams racial comments at your friends, standing there and smiling awkwardly is white privilege. And then having the entire national mainstream media attack you for that is your white privilege. And then getting death threats and having your school temporarily shut down due to bomb threats, that's white privilege. And then having those people dox you and try to find excuses to ruin your life even after they find out that the story is garbage, that's your white privilege. And then having them contact prospective universities that were considering accepting you and telling them that you're racist and not to accept you, that's white privilege. That's what they're saying. You see? Do you see how that works? Do you see? How can you have an argument in good faith with someone like this? You can't be racist to white people. Yes, I understand this violence is occurring and it's okay. It's all about fighting capitalism, and that situation with that white kid proves that white kid had privilege. Now, he goes on to say the reason it proves white privilege was because Nick Sandmann was able to get a lawyer and try to receive justice. How does that prove white privilege? First off, he would have never been attacked if it wasn't for his skin color. That would be the equivalent of me saying this. Let's say that you're black, right? And let's say that you legitimately get fired for being black. Your boss is a racist and he fires you for being black. Screw that boss. And you, regardless of your financial status, you're able to obtain a lawyer who proves that you were fired for being black and you win $1 million lawsuit. Okay? Is that your black privilege? Well, you only got that $1 million because you're black. No, of course not. You were able to get justice for someone who unjustly attacked you in a racist way. And you deserve that. That is justice. You deserve your financial windfall. Absolutely. More importantly, the person who was the racist, the person who was in the wrong, deserves to pay. Who in their right mind would look at you and say, oh, that's your black privilege? Attacked by the nation's media for being black? There's your black privilege. If anything, the fact Nick Sandmann was able to obtain a lawyer and file a lawsuit, if it was any sort of privilege, it might have been privilege of he has money. I don't know if that's true or not. Or maybe it was privilege that he had connections that were able to get him in touch with a lawyer. How is that white privilege? It's so stupid. And this is what gets me. I don't mind having an argument in good faith. Prime K's nice enough to let me on his channel. For those of you that watch Twitch, I did the debate in Prime K's channel here Monday. Nice enough guy. I debate him on Black Lives Matter. Every single incident I show of a Black Lives Matter person behaving in a very violent manner, he either's like, oh, I didn't know about that, or, well, one bad apple. That's not arguing in good faith. It's not. I'm sorry. You're either have cognitive dissonance and you're willing to ignore every obvious case of corruption or of violence, from Black Lives Matter. Do I get this heated when they don't put cheese on my burger? Sometimes I prefer a burger without cheese. But thank you, Furry Dude, for being here. At least that weight comment was a little better than most of the ones I get. Who am I voting for, Trump or Biden? Trump. I don't mind people making fun of my weight and stuff. In fact, if you're here, I actively encourage you to make fun of my weight because I'm trying to lose weight and I have crappy willpower. And so if you make fun of me, perhaps you'll fat shame me into a healthier lifestyle. So I don't mind it at all. Let's see. I live in Australia and it's apparently wrong to have pride in our country. It's deemed racist if we say we love Australia. Yeah, see the same thing here. Incident after incident, flying the American flag's deemed racist. Someone calls me a Mr. Krabs looking ass. Now that's getting, listen, I don't mind the weight aspect of that, but let's be honest. I have nowhere near the money of Mr. Krabs, nor the business leader acumen. Right, I agree BLM is a terrorist organization. Now, do I believe everyone that supports BLM is? No. Do I believe there are good people that support BLM because they think it just means getting justice for black people? Yes, I do believe that. But they're being misled. The people that are running that movement, and I understand it's not like there's one person at the head of BLM, but the movement in general and the people that are the driving force behind it are terrorists. Most of them are Marxist or globalist. And they're being supported by people that don't care at all about black lives, but care about causing racial division so that they can obtain power. Like the Democrats. Why is it a terrorist organization? Because it uses or defends violence to achieve political ends. Would you say the majority of people that claim to speak for Black Lives Matter at least said that the burning down of the Minneapolis precinct was worthwhile? Was the burning down of the Minneapolis precinct strictly for revenge? No, they admit. It was for a goal of achieving political movements to help their cause. So they've burnt down a police precinct for political motivation. That's terrorism. Not all BLM groups do, say Furry Dude. Get off Fox News, you R-word. Good job. It doesn't matter if all do. That's like saying not all KKK groups ran over someone at Charlottesville, therefore they're not a bad organization. It's stupid. I'm sick and tired of the excuse, well, if only 10% of Black Lives Matter is engaged in terrorism, and if 60% more either ignores that terrorism or defends that terrorism, that doesn't prove that they're a terrorist organization. Again, I'm not saying that everyone involved is doing that, but it is clear that that movement is willing to use terrorism for political ends. It is. Is it everyone? No. Is it the movement in whole? Yes. If the Tea Party, for example, had riots, if 30 people had died during riots the Tea Party was having, if the Tea Party would have taken over 6 city blocks and then shot an unarmed black kid in a car, and there was audio of them saying, he's still breathing, and then putting more bullets in him, if they would have burnt down police precincts, if they would have went after Obama in the White House like they did with Trump, they would have been called racist, they would have been called terrorists, they would have been dealt with swiftly. Is the KKK a terrorist group? Yes. If they're willing to use political violence. Now, they don't do much anymore. They're not an effectual terrorist group because what makes a group powerful is how many members do they have? There's hardly any in the KKK. And what sort of political power do they have? Almost none. No one takes them seriously. But can they do real damage? Yes, absolutely. And the KKK, I'll go even further than that. Not just the KKK, white nationalist movements in general. If you're willing to use violence to achieve your political end, then yes. Now, could there be one branch of the KKK that says, I don't agree with the violence that the other branch did? Sure, absolutely. But if they know that violence is occurring in the KKK and they're lynching people, for example, you remember they used to do, they're not so prominent now. Point to me a case of the KKK killing someone. I'll be happy to call it out. I have no love for them. I remember when they used to kill people in great numbers, when the Democrats were controlling them, probably still a lot of Democrats within their ranks. But back then when it was the, the foot soldiers of the Democrat, much like the Black Lives Matters, the current racist foot soldiers of the Democrats. But I remember back then what made them so powerful was they had political power. Just like Black Lives Matter. So yes, it's worth focusing on. Oh, I don't mind the kitties coming to nip at my heel. It's fun. Makes the show better. And by the way, Furry Dude, he did make some weight jokes and he called me a retard, which, look, I don't mind. You could use, I don't get offended by words, but it's not a word I like to use. Whatever. I work with people with autism and stuff, so I've seen people use that word in shitty ways. But whatever, I'm not going to yell at you for that. It's just not something I do. So that's stupid, but pushing back against me is fine. I don't mind that. But that's what you see. Excuses for the violence, deflections for the violence. It's about taking down capital. The other thing I was going to say, when I said, remember his concession that he equated white privilege with male privilege. Now, again, I've yet to hear anyone answer this argument because they can't, because they know it's garbage. If your argument for why there's institutional racism against blacks, let's say we're going to make that argument. So we're going to sit down for a debate, and me and the person I'm debating, that person's position is going to be institutional racism against blacks. And the big example they're going to give is the law enforcement community. And we know that's likely to what's going to happen because that's what Black Lives Matter is. They say the biggest focus needs to be the mistreatment of police towards blacks and the legal system in general, prison population, etc. So clearly they say that's the big issue that proves discrimination. Now they might say there's others. Housing could be one. Education could be one. But the big issue they've chosen to focus on quite clearly is law enforcement and the legal system, right? There's no debating this, right? That's the big main focus at least, correct? So clearly they think that discrimination within law enforcement would be a huge problem and a huge indicator of systemic bigotry against their group. Okay? I think we could all agree with that, even people that will disagree with my outcome here. So, the same people that say that, I always say, they then go on to talk about not only is the system systemically racist, it's also systemically sexist against women. And so the point I always make. Now, he's conceded that argument, the person I'm talking to, because he admits, yes, it's all the same privilege that comes with being white, it's the same privilege that comes with being male. And he says that's why there's more violence against people. That's not true. The system being set up by men, therefore meaning other people are more likely to experience violence, is wrong across the world, but particularly in the United States. In almost every aspect of violence, men are overwhelmingly the victims. Whether it be workplace, like accidental violence, whether it be crimes of all sorts of violence, whether it be war, clearly men, even suicide victims. All forms of violence, men are overwhelmingly. So if the system's set up by men to benefit men, why are men primarily the victims of violence? But more importantly, so we've agreed that focus on the legal system and law enforcement, that's the big area we need to focus on that proves institutional racism. And so would you be shocked if I told you that the discrepancy between blacks and whites in our legal system in almost all ways are about 10%? I don't know the exact number, but it's somewhere around there. So blacks are 10% or 11% more likely to get a speeding ticket, 11% or so more likely to be stopped, to be arrested, to be charged, 11% longer sentencing, etc. Now, I see those stats and say, okay, maybe it's something to do with race, maybe it's racism, but maybe it's not. Maybe there's other factors. Maybe it has to do with black people committing more crime. Maybe the reason black people are more likely to get sentenced are because they have less money in general, which means they could get a less effective lawyer. I don't know. You could say yes, but the reason they have less money might be because of racism. Oh, okay. But now we're getting somewhere. The numbers themselves don't prove racism. It doesn't prove that the policing is systemically racist. You have to look at all the reasons. For example, why are blacks 2.5 times more likely to be shot by police than whites? Maybe it's because they commit 2.5 times more violent crime. Maybe. Now you might say, well, the reason they commit more violent crime is because of poverty. And the reason that there's poverty is because they're black. Maybe that's true. That's worth looking at. But that doesn't prove the police are systemically racist. It might prove that police are systemically biased against poor people, but not racist. Maybe there is some racism. I don't know. The truth is we can't have these conversations because instead we say all cops are bastards and the police are all racist. George Floyd was murdered for being a black man, but there's no proof of any of this. So the conversation that really could help solve things is never allowed to occur because it's stopped by just screaming racism. But fine, if that's the game you want to play, then let's play it. So you agree the system's set up to benefit white people and it's set up to benefit men. So we agree that looking at law enforcement is a good way to see if there's institutional bigotry or bias. We agree, well, if that's the case with black people, it proves that it's institutional racism. Okay, that's where we're at. Would you be shocked to know that the discrepancy between blacks and whites is even bigger between men and women when it comes to the legal system? So if blacks are 10% more likely to be arrested than whites, men are about 25 to 30% more likely to be arrested than women. And they get to about 25% to 30% lengthier sentences than women on average. And they're more likely to be found guilty than women, etc., to a bigger discrepancy than blacks to whites. So, does that prove that our system is institutionally sexist against men? Is that what that proves? He doesn't think so. The person I'm arguing with, he spends all this time talking about the injustice. Oh, the law enforcement system and its injustice targeting black people. Yet he doesn't breathe a word about it targeting men. In fact, he spends all that time talking about the law enforcement system, and he still mentions about how the system's set up to benefit men. How can that be? Why are you only focusing on one form of injustice from law enforcement? Where are the Men Lives Matter movements? Where are the marches in the street? Where are people telling women to shut up because they're not the victims of police like men? Where's all of that? I don't see any of that. And you might say, well, black injustice versus whites is worse than men versus women. No, it's not. Not according to the data. Men versus women's worse than black versus white. And we all know it. Go ahead. Let's have a domestic violence situation. A black man and a white woman. Who do you think the police are more likely to arrest? Probably the black man. Now let's have a white man and a black woman. Domestic violence. Who are the police more likely to arrest? The white man. We all know that. We know it. We know that 90% of the prison population is men. We know this. But it's just ignored. You know what they say? As soon as you say it, they'll say it without even thinking. If you bring this up to someone, here's what they'll say, right? This is exactly what they'll say. Without thinking, they'll go, well, yeah, men commit more crime. Yes! Right! Exactly! Now, if someone says that, if a Black Lives Matter person says to me, oh, blacks are 10% more likely to be arrested than whites, and I say, well, that's because blacks commit more crime, they'll scream racist. But if I say men are 30% more likely to get arrested than women, they'll say, well, that's because men commit more crime. And if I said bigot, they'll be like, what the hell are you talking about? That's just reality. Do you see? Now do you see? And when I brought this up in that debate with that guy Destiny, you know what he said? You ready for this? The fact that, I agree, he agrees with the statistics. No denying that. So he says the fact that men are more victimized by our law enforcement system, does that prove that the system is set up to benefit women? Does that prove sexism against men? No, it doesn't. You know what it proves? The patriarchy. If women are more the victim of violence, that proves the system set up to benefit men. If men are more of the victim of violence, that proves the system is set up to benefit men. You see? You see how it works? Nick Sandman's attacked for being white, and that proves he has white privilege. Right, men in family courts get screwed. We know there's tons of ways. Now, having said that, there are ways in which women are affected detriment. You see, it's complicated. Life's complicated. These are complicated questions. Now, am I suggesting then, well then, we need to, the cops need to stop being as harsh on men? No, not necessarily. I'm saying we need to look at the reasons behind these numbers. Some of it could be bigotry against men. It could be that men genetically commit crimes more than women. They have more, their characterization of aggression's higher. That could be. It could be culture, that we have a culture that influences men to be more aggressive. That could be. I doubt, but it could be. It could be men are more likely to not have communal benefits. So if a man's poor, there's not a network to help him out like there is with a woman. There could be tons of reasons. The same is true when it comes to black versus white. That's it. That's what I'm saying. And I'm saying when you're unwilling to acknowledge that and you embrace a movement like Black Lives Matter, I think you're making a mistake. But oftentimes, and I'm assuming, did it look like in my discussion with that person, did it look like I was arguing in bad faith? I wasn't. But they showed who they truly were. You can't be racist to white people. This is about fighting capitalism. Nick Sandmann being attacked for his skin color proves he has white privilege. Yes, violence occurs, but it's like the Revolutionary War. It's a good thing. I didn't have to say it. I didn't have to falsely accuse him. That's what he said. Or implied. Penguin says, I'm describing toxic masculinity. No, I'm not. No, I'm not at all. I'll call it toxic femininity. There. Prove me wrong. Everything in the world is because of the matriarchy. Prove me wrong. I'll wait. Right, and that's right, Alpha. If toxic masculinity means having a higher rate of suicide, more likely to lose children in family courts, more likely to be labeled as a spouse beater, be forced not to show emotions, don't want any part of it, etc. That's what they do. The truth is, the history of the world has been brutal for men and women. People that preach patriarchy and toxic masculinity want to redefine the history of the world as men subjugating women. That's garbage. And their data that they point to are things like, well, look, the majority of Fortune 500 CEOs are men. The majority of homeless are men as well. Who do I have more in common with? Why do we look at a group of the upper echelon and say, well, if they're men, therefore you get some benefit for it? Why do we look at the top instead of the bottom? Why wouldn't that be equally applicable? Why can't I look at the bottom rungs of society and say, wow, it's disproportionately men? Therefore, it proves that this system is set up to be detrimental against men. You're not proving, just throwing a label out toxic masculinity and saying, yes, that proves, that's what they, go ahead, insert something. A meteor is going to hit the world tomorrow. Well, that's because toxic patriarchy. Okay. Poland didn't do much to fight back against Hitler. Well, that's because Poland had toxic masculinity. Okay. That's a cult. You're just defining a term. You say, what does toxic masculinity mean? Well, everything bad that occurs is toxic masculinity. Is there such thing as toxic femininity? How do you define masculinity? I had a feminist course that ended up getting a D in because I knew more about feminism and how it was being portrayed, third-wave feminism, than the professor. But one of the days she says this. She goes, here's a study that proves that children that are raised in a feminine environment actually end up doing better than children raised in a masculine environment. And I said, well, define feminine versus masculine. Well, masculine is vindictive, vengeful, not caring, not showing emotion, not hugging, being standoffish, not having body contact, etc. Feminine is caring and loving and nurturing and embracing your child and laughing with your child. And I said, so you've just defined masculine to mean bad and feminine to mean good. And your study says, oh, it's better to raise your kid good than raise your kid bad. Yeah, okay, I could do the same thing. Does being a man mean you're masculine? No. You could be a feminine man or a masculine woman. Okay, so then you've just arbitrarily given traits. Reality, we can see, even as traditionally defined, that society is benefited by having a mix of feminine and masculine characteristics. Competition. For example, masculinity. So if we're going to say this, so let me ask you this then, Penguin, right? So then, are we going to say that history has been driven by masculinity? Is that what we're going to say? right? So for example then, if I were to tell you that in the past 40 years, primarily through capitalism and the free markets, which has been a manifestation of competitive drive, which would be considered a masculine characteristic, we have lifted half of the world's critically impoverished out of that poverty, which is less than 1 meal a day. This is the greatest time to be alive, even with all the faults of this world and even this country. It is by far the greatest time to be alive than any time in history. And it's driven by masculinity, right? So that means all of the medical advances, all of the financial gains, all of the things that have occurred, technological advances that have improved our lives, that's all the result of masculinity, correct? Right? Isn't that true? And if toxic masculinity controls everything, then even the advances we've seen for people of color, for people of different sexual orientation, people of differing religions, people of different genders, all of those advancements also came about at the behest of toxic masculinity, correct? If it controls everything. Right? Isn't that true? Why do we only focus on the negative? Well, no, everything good that happened was a fight against masculinity. And all the bad is toxic masculinity. Really? Maybe men's suicide's being driven by toxic femininity. Maybe it's being driven by people that don't give a shit about men because they say that they're all terrible and they're responsible for all the ills of the world. Maybe that's why they're killing themselves at record clip right now. Could be, right? Nah. Screw those toxic men, right? It's nonsense. It's the same with this white privilege nonsense. Toxic masculinity. How would family courts screwing men over so much a result of toxic masculinity? Care to explain this? Well, men control the system, and so they've decided to screw over themselves because basically the most important thing in life is your child and your family, but in that most important thing, overwhelmingly, the system benefits women because of toxic masculinity. What troll? On Twitch? No, don't mute them. I don't mind these people saying this. I mean, if they're just making insults or swearing or something, fine. But no, that's fine. I don't mind them. I mean, it's nonsense. You see the ridiculousness? We just focus on everything. Like, again, it's undeniable that the world is awesome. It's so much better now than it was 150 years ago. Is that because of toxic masculinity? Pharmaceutical industry, is that toxic masculinity? Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot. One of the things that allowed women to advance to equality, it had nothing to do with feminism. It had to do with medical and technological breakthroughs. Through no fault of our own or any specific gender. Toxic masculinity doesn't control everything. It's a societal thing that perpetuates gender roles. Men are taught at a young age to be manly, to hide emotions, and to be aggressive against others when confronted. That's not necessarily true. There's also biological inheritance in that men tend to be more aggressive. Again, Jordan Peterson talks about this. So if this was true, so for example, let's go with what Penguin's saying here, right? So one of the arguments is, why are there so few women in engineering? Well, it must be because societally we teach boys to play with Legos and we teach girls to play with Barbies. That's why there's less female engineers. Okay, well the experiment we could run is we then compare the United States, where supposedly that happens, to countries where that happens less. And the countries that's happened less is Scandinavia. Right? So the Scandinavian countries went out of their way to start children at young age to encourage boys to show their emotion, to encourage girls to show that they could have traditional masculinity. They could be engineers. They could play with things. They could like trucks and things like that. And you know what the result in Scandinavia is? Do you think there are more or less percentage of engineers now that are women? Less. Because when you flatten out those societal pressures, it turns out that the biological pressures exert themselves even more. And so when you even go to the point of encouraging boys to act like they do things that traditionally girls would like and girls to do things that traditionally boys would like, somehow it exacerbates the difference between men and women choose to do as a career. Why is that? Well, it's because there are gender differences. And so claiming that more aggressive men is just a social construct is garbage. It's garbage. And what we've done in the name of that is read Christina Hoff Sommers, the factual feminist, she talks about this a lot. So what we've done in the name of fighting toxic masculinity is we've created a system where our education system is overwhelmingly in favor of girls. What we used to consider just traditional boy behavior, competitive nature, horseplay, playing tag, things like that, we've now started to look down upon. And so what's one of the things we've done? We start to drug those children. Oh, you're behaving as a toxic masculine child, so we got to put you on Adderall and Ritalin. As a result, we see in the past 10 years, boys have overwhelmingly decreased their success rate in schools because we have been putting the image of traditional femininity on everyone in the name of fighting toxic masculinity. This has led to increased suicide rates, increased dropout rates, increased prison rates for boys. But no one cares because it's all toxic masculinity. So in the name of this theory that there's no proof for, we're now actually harming people. But that's okay because we feel good about it. So in Scandinavia, where they've done the most to level the playing field, we actually see that the differences are more exacerbated. And Peterson talks about the reason for this is when it comes to men and women, yes, it's true that by and large, we are very similar. So take a characteristic like aggressiveness. If you were to pull a random man and a random woman out of society, and you were to bet that the man was more aggressive than the woman, you'd be right 60% of the time. Okay? So 60-40, men are more aggressive than women. Now that still means majoritarily most of us are in the same ballpark, right? But if you go to the extreme and you took the 100 or the top 1% of most aggressive people, they would almost all be men. Because small differences at the middle are huge differences at the end. Now, it turns out with jobs like engineering, those differences matter because the number one thing to be an engineer is to have an interest in things. That's the biggest difference between men and women. Women tend to, at a young age, have an interest in people, and men tend to have an interest in things. And so even though we're more alike than different, when it comes to the people we want to be engineers, which is an extreme interest in things, those are majoritarily men. It doesn't matter how much you scream about toxic masculinity, that's not going to change. Just like the most aggressive people are men. It doesn't matter if you say, no, they were made that way by society. It's not true. And the science backs that up. Penguin says it's nature versus nurture. You can't make the natural argument because it's impossible to get the societal factor out of a picture. It's impossible to have a constant when studying this. But we have done it because we've seen that there are countries that went out of their way to, as best as possible, to level the societal playing field. So, yes, in a vacuum, it would be impossible to argue nature versus nurture. Fine, that's true. But then your argument of toxic masculinity is thrown out the window. You disprove your own argument. And we're arguing against your theory of toxic masculinity. So if you're defaulting right here, well, it's impossible to ever know, then who the hell are you to blame everything on toxic masculinity? You're admitting, I don't know if it's nature or nurture. So right out of the gate, you lose the argument. Second, even if that's the case, we still could see that even though we can never get a perfect picture, what we could do is we could see some countries have more of a society that encourages men to be traditional men and women to be traditional women than other societies. So what we do is we look at the societies that haven't made an effort in changing societal pressures versus those that have. And if the theory is right that it's societal and not nature, then we would see the countries that have tried to flatten that and have tried to say, no, we're going to actively go out of our way to make sure that we're not pressuring boys to act like boys and girls to act like boys. We would expect to see that would start to alleviate some of that. That then we would see, okay, men are becoming less interested in these type of jobs and women less in these type of jobs. But instead, it's the exact opposite. The exact opposite. And this study's been done. Tens of thousands of people were involved in these studies. Hundreds of studies. The sociologists that did it said it was the most shocking outcome of their careers. And yet it's just ignored. So you do the study expecting it to prove your case, and when it proves the exact opposite of your case, you go, well, there's no studies. Nonsense. It's nonsense. And lastly, if it was true, even if it was true that we'll never be able to figure out nature versus nurture, even if that's true, then why would we allow entire fields of our academia, of our government, to be dedicated to pretending that it is nurture and not nature. To the point where it's leading to drugging boys because they're acting too much like societal roles of boys. Increasing male suicides. Everyone wants to talk about the gender pay gap and things like that, and they always look at these studies as a whole. What they don't look at is people 25 and younger. In almost every example in academia, 25 and under, girls are crushing boys. When it comes to financial outlooks of people under the age of 25, women are crushing men. Why? Because we've tilted the scale so much the other way in the name of this theory, which you're admitting there's no way of knowing. Again, we look at the top level of society. Everything proves patriarchy. Everything. Every harm you see in the world, that's a result of patriarchy. Every good thing you see in the world, has nothing to do with patriarchy. If you have any theory like that, I don't care what you call it, patriarchy, whiteness, whatever. If you have any theory like that, you might think, wait a minute. If it's non-falsifiable, if literally I could interpret any data set ever, and that proves my theory, maybe there's a problem with my theory. You say, Penguin says, best as possible doesn't work in this instance. Plus, you're not taking into account how these countries identify gender. So, real quick. So, Penguin's argument is, we can never know if it's nature versus nurture. Therefore, I'll default to toxic masculinity. And if we could never know, then no study will ever work. Better won't matter. Unless it could be a perfect study, then we can never know. And because there could never be a perfect study, we can never know. Therefore, it must be toxic masculinity. That's so unbelievably dumb. It's mind-blowing. Then you go on. How do the countries identify gender? Are you making the argument that Scandinavia is less egalitarian? The way they define gender is they're going out of their way to try to actively encourage men to be nurses and women to be engineers. They're trying to encourage women to be more competitive in more competitive activities and men to be in more nurturing fields. They're making an active effort to do that as young as preschool. Parents are making an active effort to do that. The literature is quite clear on this. That's what they're doing. Despite that, the gender differences are increasing in adulthood. Because when you maximize choices, when you take societal pressures out, you maximize the differences. That's what happens. Would I think gender here is different there? Agreed. I just explained that to you. Would you call a person with a vagina here a female, but a person with a vagina in Sweden could be anything they want? Exactly. They're wrong, but yes, you're proving my point. Yes. So in the Scandinavian countries like Sweden, they're going out of their way to make sure these societal pressures are they're as little as possible. So the argument is a woman isn't biological. It's just what society says a woman should be. That's nonsense and it's harmful in the first place. But even if that's the case, how would a country like Sweden that embraces that ideology more than a country like the United States then result in more female nurses and more male engineers? If the reason men are predominantly engineers is because society tells them, hey, you're a man, you should get into engineering. Why in the hell with a country where they're saying, hey, no, hell, you could have a vagina and be a man, a woman, whatever, male nurses, whatever. Why would that society be more likely to produce a higher percentage of male engineers and female nurses? How could that skew the numbers? That's the exact argument. That's how you run the experiment. We can't control nature. We can't control nurture. We could put our thumb on the scale. We could say, okay, society says we expect men to do this and women to do this. Let's flip that. Let's take a country where we say the opposite. No, women do. We want you into engineering and men, we want you into nursing. And yet that results in more male engineering and more women in nursing. How does that then? Well, that doesn't prove it's still nurture, not nature. No, ridiculous. So, all right, I gotta go. I gotta get to bed. But yeah, it was fun. Thanks for being here, by the way, Penguin, even though we're disagreeing here. But you can see through me going through that how this idea of white privilege, of the toxicity that it leads to. It's used selectively. We could prove quite easily that there's privilege of all races, privilege of all genders. You can see how it leads to making statements that you would never in good conscience make, such as you can't be racist to people of a certain skin color. All people of a certain skin color have some sort of privilege. Right? It's okay to have violence for your political movement and fighting for that. We need to reject capitalism. If you're attacked for your skin color and you're white, that proves your white privilege. These are statements that no one would ever in good conscience make. But when you believe in this disastrous, toxic, bigoted ideology this is the net result. Penguin, not good. Penguin says, I would love to talk to you about it more. He says, I took a class on this in high school, freshman year. I know. Good God. So, all right. Hey, let me give out the lemons on D Live. I could do that. And thanks if anyone donated. I didn't see, but I appreciate it if you did. I am taking donations. One thing I'll say before I go, if I don't have ads, right? And I do talk about donations and stuff, which I do apologize for. It's not my favorite thing. But if you want to help me out financially and actually help yourself out, I have started selling life insurance, and I would love to help you out. And listen, obviously I'm biased because I'm selling life insurance, but let me tell you, this is really true. Life insurance is very important because most of us aren't frugal enough and aren't what's the word I'm looking for? Trustworthy enough to actually put money aside. The most important thing in life is your family and taking care of your family. And when inevitably we die, we don't want to leave a burden to our family. And here's the thing about life insurance. It'll never be cheaper for you than it is right now. Every year you wait, it gets more expensive. So what you want is a whole life policy, not term life. So you get a policy now, you're good to go. You never have to think about it again. So I talk to you. I can give you some rates or stuff. If you think you can't afford it now, then you're definitely not going to be able to afford it in the future. So it's worth looking into. I'd love to talk to anyone who wants to talk about it. Even if you disagree, even if you're Penguin and you disagree with me, yeah, Penguin, I'll reach out to you someday. Even you, Penguin, if you need life insurance, I'd love to help you. Anyone who agrees with me politically or not. I'm not a forceful salesman or anything like that. I'll give you my honest opinion. And if you don't like what I have to say, you could go elsewhere. But our company has the best whole life rates around. It's American Income Life if you want to check about it. It's the only A&M Best A+ rated life insurance company out there. The rates are union negotiated, which is why they're cheaper. But yeah, check it out. So reach out to me. You can find me at rob.nor@gmail.com if you want to reach out to me about life insurance, or just put a comment someday in the threads, and I'll talk to you by phone. We do the whole process over Zoom or over phone. It wouldn't matter. Or if you're in Pennsylvania, I could come meet you and we could hang out too. So that's fine. Chris Mayo says, there is a market segment that could benefit from buying term and investing in the difference. That's absolutely true, right? Let me give my spiel on life insurance real quick. So there's two types of life insurance. There's term and there's whole life. Term insurance means that it terminates. So you can get term in 4, 10, 20, or 30 years would be your term. So let's say I'm 36. So I could get 4-year term insurance. So my rate would be way cheaper. Let's say to get $50,000 of coverage, it would cost $30 a month to get term insurance. Now, the problem with that is it doesn't accumulate cash value because it eventually ends. So 4 years from now, if I don't die, I get $0. The term just goes away. Now I could re-up for another 4-year term, but now my rate I'll be paying is as a 40-year-old, not as a 36, which means that it substantially goes up, and it'll do this every 4 years. So the problem is you start off paying like $30 a month, then you pay $45 a month, then you pay $65 a month. 4 years after that, then you're paying $80 a month, then you're paying $120 a month. That's for $50,000 of coverage. Now, as a 36-year-old, I could get whole life coverage. That might cost me $60, so it costs me $25 more, right? But guess what? That's guaranteed 100% to pay out. It accumulates cash value. And no matter how old I get, I could be 90. Guess how much I'm paying a month? $60 a month. It never goes up. So what happens is people get term insurance, and then once they get into their 60s, they're like, oh, my term ran up, I'll get another term. And now all of a sudden it's going to cost them $220 for term insurance for 4 years. And then if they don't die in those 4 years, now they're 65. Now it's going to cost them $400 for $50,000 of coverage. And what happens is most people don't invest wisely enough, or even if they do invest the difference, they end up spending all that money by the time they reach retirement. And now they're in a situation with like, crap, I have kids and grandkids. I blew all that money. And now what am I going to do? Whereas if you get whole life, you never have to worry about it. 100% payout guaranteed. You live to be 100 years old. Plus it accumulates money you could borrow against. And you could even set it up to pay off. So when you reach the age of 65, instead of getting $50,000, you take the cash value you've had and you put it back in for a reduced paid up option. And now you don't get the $50,000, but you get the $40,000, and you never pay another dime the rest of your life. But yeah, you're absolutely right. If you were one of the like 1% of people that is a fantastic investor and you're very disciplined, you could actually make more money if the stock market does well, if you invest in term and take the difference, and you're disciplined enough to take the difference you would have spent on whole life and invest that. But the percentage of people that could do that is so rare, and you're still taking a huge risk, because what if something like COVID hits and you had your stuff invested in something and it completely crashes? The entire idea of life insurance is to transfer risk. And if you're investing part of the money that you're, in other words, would be spending or saving up for life insurance, you're not eliminating that risk. You're still gambling. You just hope you're gambling successfully. So that's why I prefer whole life. Yeah, Penguin, I'd love to talk to you. And again, no matter what state you're in, I could talk to you about it and I could hook you up, and it will be a no pressure thing. But I will tell you the importance. You should have life insurance. You absolutely should. It's something, I'll be honest with all of you here, it's something I didn't think about until I found out I was having a kid. And then I thought, oh shit, what would my kid do? What if something happens to me and my wife? What would my kid's outlook be? Would it be fair to our parents or whoever would watch after our kid that we'd basically stick them, they're in their late 50s and now they have to raise a kid? Where are they going to come up with the money? So that's why I got a policy for me and my wife. So it's something to think about. And that's a way you could help me and I could help you. And it's not just donating. So anytime, reach out to me on Discord, Penguin. I'll be happy to talk to you about that. And we certainly look, and let me just say also to anyone watching, Penguin is the person I've been responding to on Twitch. I don't think you've been rude to me at all. You came on the show and you talked to me one time, and I might disagree with you and I might seem snarky, but I actually really respect you for coming on and talking to me. I do. So thank you so much. I think that it makes the show more enjoyable and that this is what we should be doing, talking to people that disagree with us. So thank you so much. I agree with that 100%. Regardless of income level, people should have at least 6 figures of death benefit. Absolutely. Because think about it this way. The price of a funeral, for example, increases with the price of inflation. So 20 years ago, you could have a funeral for like $3,000, $4,000. Now the average cost of a funeral, depending on where you live, $9,000 to $15,000. So if you're looking at your possible funeral expense and you're looking at a cost of a funeral today, the problem is, do you plan on dying today? Probably not. If you're like 30 or 40, you're thinking, I'll live another 30, 40 years. Do you think the cost of a funeral is going to increase or decrease in 30 years? It's going to massively increase. So if you have $15,000 of life insurance thinking, yeah, it'll be enough to cover the funeral, guess what? It's not going to be. And that's just the funeral. What if you have medical expenses at the end of life? What if you have estate taxes? What if you have a mortgage? So yeah, people should have 6 figures at least. I agree. Because the last thing you want to do is be a burden to your loved ones. And so, it sounds crappy. No one wants to talk about dying. I'm the same way. I don't want to talk about it. But it is. The reason, why am I working 2 jobs right now? Because I need to take care of my family. And I come on here and I yell and scream about the need for personal responsibility. So what kind of a hypocrite would I be if I say, well, I'm just going to work 40 hours a week and I only make $15 an hour. Now I can't afford to take care of my wife and kid. So no, I'll get a second job. I'll work 100 hours a week. I'll work 110 hours a week. If something happens to us and our car blows up, I'll work 130 hours a week. I'll do what I have to do. That doesn't mean I'll never need a hand up. I get it. I've been on food stamps before in my life. I'm not making that claim. But I'm saying when I'm alive, I could do what I have to keep my family going. But what happens when I die? It don't matter how much of a hard worker I want to be. If I'm gone, I'm gone. So if I'm willing to work this hard for my family now, the least I could do is be putting away like 5% of my income to make sure if something happens to me, my family's protected. That's why you get life insurance. Because everyone here, if you're the breadwinner or if you're working mutually with a partner, if you're a man or woman, it doesn't matter. You're working, number one, first and foremost, to help your family because you love your family and protect them. And so the least you could do is make sure if you're no longer around, you're not a burden to your family. So that's my spiel. That's right. It could leave your loved ones as a huge burden, you know? And here's the irony. Here's the sick paradox of life insurance, right? Once the younger you are, the less you care about it. But by the time you're old enough to say, oh my God, I'm in my 50s, 60s. I don't want to be a burden to my kids. Guess what? That's when life insurance is way more expensive. If you would have got life insurance when you were 18, you could have got $100,000 of coverage that would last no matter what, and you'd be paying probably about $28 a month. For $100,000 of coverage, $28. You'd be 80 years old. Guess how much you're paying? $28 a month. You'd have cancer. Guess how much you're paying? $28 a month. Instead, you wait until you're 50, 60. Now for that $100,000 of coverage, you're paying $300-$400 a month. And that's when you're collecting Social Security and trying to retire. So that's the point in your life where you're going to be the most strapped for cash. And now you need it more than ever. So that's why it sucks to think about, you're going to die. I'm going to die. So it's something that you need to focus on and think about. So sorry for selling my business on here, but I don't have advertisers. So maybe I'll talk about that routinely. But if you have any questions about life insurance, I don't care if you just want to talk about it and then decide to go with another company. Also, we're able to offer you a bunch of free stuff, so it's worth calling me, like a health discount card that could get you 20 to 60% off at certain pharmacies and eye care places and chiropractors. We offer also free child safety kits. And these help you in the case of child abduction. I did a video on it. You can check on my YouTube channel. So if you have kids or anything like that, please get in touch with me. I can help you out with life insurance, no matter, as long as you're in the United States. I probably can't help you if you're outside the United States, but you can still talk to me about life insurance, and maybe you could find a place in your area. So it would really help me out if you guys contact me and we consider that. So even if you don't buy from me, it's something to look into. Thank you all so much. You're the best fans. I'm incredibly humbled. Anyone would come on to agree or disagree with me and value what I have to say. I really appreciate it. Please consider subscribing to me on DLive, Twitch TV, Normal America on DLive, Normal America with Rob Noor on Twitch.tv. I'm on YouTube with Normal America with Rob Noor. So consider looking me up on all three of those platforms and maybe liking, subscribing, and sharing me with some people. So thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate you all. Remember, do what you can in your personal life. Personal responsibility, personal liberty is the most important thing. Thank you for people that are willing to disagree with me. Everybody has their own style, but I recommend show the world. Your words are one thing, but show the world you're a good person through your actions. And then they'll see what your ideology is and realize, maybe people that all like Trump, they're not all horrible people. Maybe conservatives aren't all horrible people. Maybe all Democrats aren't all horrible people. At least it's a step in the right direction. So thank you so much for saying great show. Thank you so much, everyone. Talk to you soon. Have a good one.